Now, for those who are unfamiliar with him, Morph is a being made out of plasticine, who lies on a desktop with his other friends who are also made of plasticine, all of whom are able to morph themselves into anything they want, and have various small key adventures using the various items that have been left on their office space home. Basically, for you Atlanteans who are not familiar with Morph, he's essentially the Gumby of the UK, and while I would usually go on about how the Americans are stealing our ideas again, much to my surprise, Gumby actually came out first, but that's a story for another time. Now, the interesting thing about Morph is that even though he is technically the star of his own show, his show is almost always shown as part of another TV series, usually art programs like Take Heart, where he got his premiere in 1977, though I became familiar with Morph from the CBBC art show classic, Smart, hosted by Kristen O'Brien, Zoe Ball, and the late Mark Spate, among others. And it became one of the biggest selling points of the show, so much so that the host would even interact with Morph on the show itself, and Morph was even a part of the logo and is probably the reason why Smart was more popular than Art Attack. Well, that and of course, it didn't have the head in it. Anyway, as for the show of Morph itself, none of the characters in Morph can speak English. Instead, they speak a gibberish language, which sounds like Donald Duck has had a stroke. But it is very charming in its own way, much like the Clanger's voice, and since episodes of Morph are between 1 and 5 minutes, they don't last long enough to get annoying. They did have some narration in the early episodes, but they eventually decided to go the full Tom and Jerry and just have the characters' actions speak for themselves. As I said before, Morph is just a quaint little show about a group of simple and endearing characters that inhabit a slightly surreal world, and they just do whatever they feel like. In fact, some of the episodes are so simple that a lot of them are just one joke played out for less than a minute. Like when Morph and his friend Chaz, who was always my favourite character, call up a help centre just so that they can dance to the Please Hold music.
Please hold. Your call is currently being held in a queue.
Or similarly where they run on twin record desks to also play music, OK Go style. It's very simple and enjoyable, and it's just the kind of thing you'd want in a kids show. In fact, Morph is the kind of show that I regard as being the perfect first show to show to a newborn child, since it's very unthreatening and has a nice slow pace to it. It's very creative and is simple enough that any person, regardless of how much their brain is developed, can understand it, which is all the more fitting when you realise that Morph was the first major project that Aardman worked on. In fact, Morph is such a member of the old guard in terms of Aardman, he wasn't even created by Nick Park, since he hadn't joined the company yet. Instead, he's the brainchild of Peter Lord, the other main man behind Aardman, so much so that he's basically the mascot of Aardman behind Wallace and Gromit, and yet ironically the two have never crossed paths, not even in a background cameo, as far to my knowledge. Admittedly, the rules of Morph's world aren't very consistent, but like any great cartoon, there doesn't need to be. The show is just meant to be a great exercise of the imagination, both for the viewers and the creators. In fact, Morph is essentially the sophomore year animation student's final project turned into a franchise, only with a lot more effort put into it, and much less pretentiousness. And since Morph's animation style is so simple, and so linear throughout the franchise's run, that you could watch an old episode from the 70s, or an episode made right now, and almost not be able to tell the difference, with the exception of the screen size of course. The writing of Morph is so timeless that it could exist at any time. Really, all I need to say about Morph is, go watch it. There's an official YouTube channel that has uploaded a ton of Morph episodes and still uploads them on a regular basis, both old and new, and has some great compilations and behind the scenes videos as well. No matter how much they add more modern elements, it still stays timeless. Simply put, Morph is a show that needed to exist, and in a way feels like it's almost always been around. It's the kindly grandparent of stop-motion kids shows, and I'm sure that he's going to keep going long into the future. So, to close, Morph may not be the most mentally stimulating TV show in the world. It is a great, enjoyable show that anyone could watch, and everyone should watch. And that seems like the great way to both end this episode and start this year's Aardmay. But stick around, because there's plenty more to come. Let's get things started with Nick Park's first major release, a short film that took him nearly a decade to complete, and has the traditional stop-motion film staples of being weird, slightly creepy, and very charming, but all from that laid-back British style that, in all honesty, hadn't really been seen in stop-motion beforehand. Many of you already know this story, but for the sake of fun, I'm recapping it anyway. Wallace is a kind, eccentric man from Wigan, Manchester, who loves cheese and is somewhat of an amateur inventor. His inconsistent skill ranges from idiot with a saw and a glue gun to absolute savant who's capable of making things that even Einstein and Tesla would be jealous over. Alongside him is his silent and fateful / long-suffering canine companion, Gromit, who is the more level-headed of the two and often has the job of pulling Wallace's ass out of the fire when things get tough. You know, I've always wondered how these two actually met each other. I know we get a little glimpse of that in the movie, and there is a comic series and a Telltale game series that might go into greater detail on that, but as far as I'm aware, we've never actually gotten into an official origin story. Anyway, as stated before, Wallace loves cheese, and when thinking of places to go on holiday, he thinks that they need to go somewhere where there's lots of cheese.
Cheese! We'll go somewhere where there's cheese.
And of course, in the cartoon world, there's no greater place for cheese than the moon. So Wallace and Gromit make themselves a rocket to go to the moon to try its cheese. But as it turns out, not only is the moon bizarre in that it has an atmosphere, but some unfriendly characters live there too. So maybe they actually landed on the moon from Power Rangers.
After 10,000 years, I'm free! It's time to conquer Earth!
After so many years of seeing the effect of this movie had on its creators and the industry in general, it's funny to see just how simple it is compared to the stuff we've got today. Now don't get me wrong, for a student film from the late 70s, at least that's when it was started, this is unbelievably ambitious, but its very slow pace, laid-back feel and its arguably creepy second half, I'll get to that later, does make this seem a bit underwhelming compared to what came later. There just feels like there's a lot of points where nothing is really happening, and in later productions they'd fix that with some really clever and unique jokes. Here there's a little like that, and while there are definitely some clever and interesting gags, the fact that Park was working on this by himself did mean that there's a lot of the short that feels a bit lackluster and amateurish. It just feels like what it is really, that being a student project. But when evaluating it on its own, it's still very charming, and one of the things that makes Wallace and Gromit so enjoyable is their chemistry together, and Wallace's brilliant vocal performance by the late Peter Sallis.
Wensleydale.
Prior to Wallace and Gromit, Sallis had starred in a lot of things on British television. Most significantly, he played a role in the classic Doctor Who serial The Ice Warriors, played Ratty in a stop-motion version of Wind in the Willows, and most famously starred in Last of the Summer Wine. But it's funny to think that the role that would define his career came in the winter of his life. He was in his 60s at the time he did the voice work, and he didn't even get to see the results of his labours until nearly a decade after he did it. But his soft, endearing Midlands accents and the tone of his voice really made this character come alive.
Set coordinates for 62 West Wallaby Street.
I really couldn't think of anyone else playing the role, even back then or now, and the character himself is great. The absent-minded northerner with a penchant for tinkering, who always meets adversity, but his innocent air and optimistic quality makes it so that nothing really ever gets him down.
No crackers, Gromit. We've forgotten the crackers.
It's a really enjoyable character, and he just feels like the kind of person that we've all met in our lives. And his partner, despite having no voice, has a lot of personality too. You can tell that he's the more logical and sensible of the two, and despite the fact that he probably finds living with Wallace tedious and a bit of a handful, you can tell that the two have a strong and rich history together. And it's a real testament to Nick Park's skill that he can give Gromit so much emotion and character just from his facial expression and body language alone. Supposedly, Wallace was inspired by Nick Park's own dad, who also enjoyed a bit of tinkering in his shed, and Gromit is based off of Park himself, and the two are very endearing and ironically do have a bit of a father-son chemistry, but with the father in this regard being more senile, so the son is a bit more logical and effective of the two, but they clearly have a strong connection, and this connection is one of the things that makes the two so watchable. But regardless of who the characters are meant to be, their first journey out together helps cement their place in animation history, even though when the two actually make it to the moon, it's a bit underwhelming. And isn't it ironic that not only did the two start off with an adventure that often most cartoons or comics would do near the end of
their tenure, but also how it's not as exciting or enjoyable as their literal more down-to-earth adventures that they would have in the future. Even the bits before they go to the moon have this really dull and empty feel to them, and I get that it was kind of supposed to, but it's just not very enthralling or engaging. However, one thing that definitely made this short memorable for me was the villain of the short. This short introduced many elements that would become synonymous with Wallace and Gromit and Aardman in general. The quirky sense of humour, even though a lot of the jokes are very subtle and not given much attention to, which allows for the greater appreciation on them and repeated viewings. The laid-back feel, the use of details in the background. But the most significant thing to be introduced from this special was Aardman's great ability to make really creepy and intimidating villains. Starting off with this mute moon janitor robot thing that, despite looking like an old 1950s cooker on wheels, through a mixture of his motions, creepy sound effects and the brilliant music, just ends up being a really unnerving character, which definitely had me freaked out when I watched this short as a kid. Speaking of which, for a very low budget film, the music is surprisingly epic, especially near the end, and while it doesn't play often, anytime it does, it really drives home the emotion and the feel that Park wants to convey.
The fuse! You forgot to light the fuse!
And it's one of the many things that makes the climax all the more enthralling, despite how uneventful the first act is, which is another thing that's become a great staple of Aardman Productions: amazing end set pieces. One last thing to say, of course, is the animation. While like everything it looks very amateurish, stiff, undefined, blobby, and also rather inconsistent at times, the simple charm and simplicity of it and the great design still make it interesting to watch, even if said designs haven't really been put to their full potential, but that's what sequels are for. Plus there are some bits that do look very impressive for the time, like the rocket taking off and the robot skiing at the end. It's also funny to think that even after all these years later, Aardman still makes the fingerprint marks visible on their models on purpose, which is unbelievably cute and charming. Gromit comes off the best looking in the short. His models are always smooth and his motions come off the best. Sadly, Wallace's models do look like something a 10-year-old would make on a bored Sunday afternoon, and the visible fold marks of places like the elbows and knees do ruin it a bit. But as I said before, Salus's voice acting does bring life to the character that allows you to get past that. Overall, while in comparison to what came later, A Grand Day Out isn't the most impressive stop-motion short of all time, it is still very charming to watch now. But if you had to only watch one of the Wallace and Gromit shorts, this isn't the one I would recommend. Which one I would recommend, you ask? Well, stay tuned for that, because both the career of Nip Park and Aardman have only just begun at this point, as has Aardmay. Yes, by very, very, very popular demand, here it is. Creature Comforts, Aardman's fourth most iconic franchise behind Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep and Morph, and the review that everyone wanted to see last year, but I didn't do it because it wasn't a movie! But I digress. This was actually the first production that Nip Park worked on after officially joining Aardman. Since The Grand Day Out was done in conjunction with Aardman, Nip Park made it as a student project and got Aardman to assist him, which is what got him the job at Aardman. Creature Comforts is a brilliantly simple concept that is also remarkably versatile, and it all starts from its origin, that being the original short film. The first episode of Creature Comforts was actually part of a short film series made by Aardman and commissioned by Channel 4 called Lip Sync, of which the premise was that Aardman took a bunch of audio from various interviews by British people about their daily lives and had animation put over it, or in one case a conceptual short film about Shakespeare, or also being the origin of a character who I'll also be taking a look at later this month. All the films had the traditional Aardman sense of charm, but most of them were quite boring and a little creepy, though admittedly looking at them today feels like uncovering an ancient painting, looking into the past and seeing something so aged and also so odd. It's quite intriguing, but on their own they're quite naff. However, Nick Park had the brilliant idea that for his contribution he would make the interviewees look like animals, and from there Creature Comforts was born. And it is a great testament to the proof that even the most boring and limp concept can be made interesting and funny just by the right amount of imagination and animation. The original short film is hilarious, mostly because Nick chose the perfect interviews and matched them with the perfect animals, such as the cougar has the voice of a Brazilian immigrant complaining about how cold, wet and miserable it is compared to his home country.
If you try to compare the situations and the environment that you live here with the environment that you live in Brazil, there is a big difference. Here, you live in a very small place.
Or the family of polar bears with the son that constantly says awkward things that match with the animals they are perfectly.
My favourite food is, I'm afraid to say, steak. I go a long way to go and get a nice steak.
Do you like lions as well then? Do you like steaks and chips with lions with it?
Not with lions, Andrew. No, I don't like lion steak.
The short also really made Park step up his game in terms of animation, and while most of the animals in question remain quite stationary, that actually works to its advantage because it gives Park the chance to focus more on the facial expressions rather than having to focus on the body movements of the models, which, if you watch A Grand Day Out, you can see how Park's attempts to focus on both resulted in the animation looking a bit clunky. Whereas here, since most of the movement comes from the creature's faces and hands and nothing else, it looks so much more polished and fluent. Plus, this is also where Park started to experiment more with his now trademark character look with wide faces and big round eyes. Plus, his lip syncing is brilliantly done, appropriately enough. And when you first find out that these interviews are genuine from behind the scenes, it just makes the humour and the creative genius all the more apparent and brilliant. It also works as a concept because since these creatures are being interviewed, it makes the fact that they're not moving that much make all the more sense. And it's also fine to see these kinds of animals talking like middle-aged Midlanders complaining about their council houses. Despite how much of a big hit the short was, it was 14 years before Aardman decided to make an actual series based around the idea, though there were some electric company ads made in the creature comfort style a year after the original short film, but the TV show and the original short film is the version that everyone is aware of and loves. The issue with the TV show, though, is that because they have more time they need to fill, they need more interviews in order to make the animations for, and since doing a really good interview is like catching lightning in a jar, in Death Valley, naturally some of the interviews they chose for the TV series weren't as funny or interesting as the short film. But the show is still a lot of fun, and even with the interviews not being as funny, the animation is still a joy to look at, though I have noticed a few times in the group interviews that they forgot which animal has which voice. Like if you look closely at this interview with the chickens, you'll see that the one on the far left and the one on the middle right switch voices.
Teamwork. That's one thing about it I like. I wouldn't like to work on my own.
It's over 100, isn't it?
Well, it used to be more than 200.
We've lost quite a few.
Because we're all getting older now, look.
The TV version also adds more gags in the animation itself, which I'm all for, and it does add a new level to the show, and make it seem less like a stop-motion version of Walking Life, which, just a word here from an animation guru, don't watch that movie, it's boring as hell. The show also added a few more rehearsed interviews, which I'm very much against, since it takes the genuosity out of the concept, but a lot of the time you can't tell which of the ones are staged and which ones are real, so it's not really that big of an issue, and thankfully the episodes only last 10 minutes, so they don't overextend the series any longer than it needs to be. There is also an American version of Creature Comforts, and I'll admit it's okay, but something about the animation style and just how the English version picked the most perfectly dull, awkward, or just plain weird people to interview really makes the whole thing come together. And the American version doesn't work in the same way, since the animation style really doesn't fit with those kinds of accents, and the interviews this time are either too generic or too specific. The great thing about Creature Comforts is that the interviews blur the line between seeming like something the animal in question would say about themselves and their lives, but also being something that you could genuinely see a regular person saying about themselves too. The American version has interviews that either seem like you can see the person who's giving the interview in your mind, but you can't sync it up with the animal.
So, I kind of look like Beyonce. With a Monique shape.
Or the opposite problem, where you can't imagine the human saying what the animal said.
Well, I'll tell you something. If you live in the Great Plains as long as I have, you'll have respect for winters. They'll come and haunt you, especially if you're not prepared for them.
But in the end, Creature Comforts is a great concept, and by and large has more in its franchise that is funny and entertaining than those that are not. So I can understand why everyone wanted to see this last year, because there's really nothing else like it in the world. But then again, that sums up a lot of what Aardman makes anyway, and that still holds true with what we'll be looking at next time.
My very first Aardman production, and Wallace and Gromit production for that matter, I ever saw was The Wrong Trousers. It was one of the films I had on video when I was little, alongside Toy Story 1 and 2, A Bug's Life, and the Paul and Linda McCartney music video collection. Don't ask. As such, this one has a very special place in my heart, and is one that I immediately think of when thinking about Wallace and Gromit. But even in spite of that connection, this is still one of the best things that Aardman has ever done. It's Gromit's birthday, and Wallace gets him a pair of techno trousers, which is really just a way of him getting out of Walking Gromit, which might sound harsh and lazy, but Wallace has got his own priorities, most notably that the pair have been running into hard times financially, so he's forced to take a lodger. A mysteriously silent penguin who may have some ulterior motives of his own. The scale of this short compared to A Grand Day Out is spectacular. Where the last short you could tell they only had about 3 sets that felt very enclosed, this special has the whole town opened up to the pair. A very empty town, granted, but with the more lavish environments both indoors and out, much more ambitious camera movements and effects, such as the camera following Wallace as he walks up the wall, and even a POV shot. And despite a more basic premise compared to the previous short, the story is a lot more complex and exciting all throughout, involving separation, a burglary, and a pair of mechanical trousers. Plus, whatever animation flaws that were in the last special have been completely ironed out, and now the process has been completely perfected. The motions are a lot more smooth, there's very few visible fold marks now, it's a lot faster, especially near the end, I'll get to that later, and there's an infinite amount of more detail both in the models and the backgrounds, and overall it just looks a lot more polished now, even with the little things with Wallace and Gromit's ears flapping in the climax due to the speed that they're going at. That's an almost negligible detail, but the fact that they thought of it is so brilliant. There are some small niggles here and there, but they're barely noticeable in the grand scheme of things. It's also a lot more emotional compared to the first short. There's a very tender moment where Gromit leaves Wallace after he feels like he's been rubbed out by the penguin, and it genuinely feels heart-wrenching, especially when you consider that we'd only had 1 episode of the 2 so far, so we don't know a lot about them yet, so it would seem completely likely that Gromit would never come back. Speaking of the penguin, he's the next in a line of great Aardman baddies. Going by the name of Feathers McGraw, he's once again a testament to how great a villain can be, even if they don't talk. And while he's not as scary as past and future antagonists, and his lack of eyebrows does give him a rather expressionless face, hell, it makes him look like he's surprised at everything he sees, his diabolical scheme and cold-hearted nature definitely makes him a more memorable villain. Plus, hey, it's an evil penguin. How many other stories have one of those? This was the first Wallace and Gromit short to introduce the now staple of the franchise, Wallace's inventions to help get him up in the morning, since apparently Wallace likes to start the day feeling like he's a marble in a Rube Goldberg machine. But it was a great way of Park expressing his creative abilities and give the Wallace and Gromit shorts a brand new sense of identity that has become its greatest staple, and even becomes a plot point in the short, which is incredibly clever.
It's the wrong trousers. The wrong trousers.
This special also won up the previous short's climax with a bit less tension but a lot more motion, intrigue, and above all, fun. With the duo running around the living room on a toy train track trying to catch Feathers, who's brandishing a gun, which is a pretty intense motif now that I think about it, but it just makes the end set piece all the more exciting. Plus, it's the first time that the two have been in mortal danger. Then again, if they can survive walking around on the moon, they may actually be immortal. It also proves that despite the lengthy and slow process the animation takes, that the end result can still be very fast-paced and fluent. I mean, just look at this. This is some of the fastest animation I've ever seen. Though if you do stop and think for a moment and apply some real-world logic, you realise that this living room to scale would be about 50 feet long. Gromit at some point seems to have 3 arms, and that spare track pieces box must be from the Time Lord since it never goes empty. But hey, it's a cartoon. This feature of the franchise was one of the biggest defining features for the pair and would be one of Aardman's biggest and most beloved traditions throughout all of its history. It also gave the pair their now stapled iconic looks, with Wallace's wide face and trademark smile and teeth, but with being more well defined than the last special. Even the animation looks a lot better, whereas the first one, due to taking years to make, that had parts that looked very inconsistent from scene to scene, and the motion and designs only look one level up a child could do, this one looks a lot more polished, professional, and, the lack for a better term, like a real stop-motion animated movie. What's helped to make that feel, though, is how everything looks like it's had an upgrade, with the style of plasticine Park was using, what he had used to construct the sets with, the quality of the sound recording and the music, the camera work, even the credits look better, though the special does suffer from the fact that even though the world seems to be more expanded, it still looks like Wallace and Gromit are the only people to inhabit this world, though thankfully they seem to realise that with the future short. Overall, The Wrong Trousers is a brilliant sequel, and it still keeps the overall style of being a very simple slice of life of this very odd duo like the original, but with still a lot of excitement and simple, subtle humour, and in my opinion, the best of the Wallace and Gromit franchise. If you only had to view one of them, make it this one. And so we come to the last of the original Wallace and Gromit trilogy, which arguably is the best, yet ironically the least remembered, which is all the more ironic given the icon that was created through this special. This is the first of the Wallace and Gromit lineage to introduce another defining feature of theirs, that being that they seem to switch jobs between every episode, which is a great way of introducing more set pieces and situations for the pair to come across. In this special, Wallace and Gromit are window cleaners, and when doing a job one day, Wallace comes across the woman of his dreams, a yarn saleswoman called Gwendolyn, voiced by Anne Reid, and while the two seem to hit it off well, Gromit notices that her dog, Preston, seems to be up to no good, and while pursuing him he ends up being framed and thrown in jail, which requires Wallace to help break him out with some rather unusual help. This is the first short to have a character that Wallace can talk to and have them talk back to him, and she's a very good vocal supporting character.
Oh, they're spanking.
Windows are our speciality.
Goodbye. Chuck.
Many people say that she's just a female Wallace, but I think that's a bit unfair. She's a lot more reserved and shy than Wallace, and it's quite sweet. And she and Wallace have good chemistry, and Anne Reid does a great job with her very sweet and gentle delivery. Despite that though, this is also the darkest and most emotional of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, not the least of which due to the slightly overwrought but still very well done music. All of this leads into the most intense and dire Wallace and Gromit yet, and while sadly the climax isn't quite as memorable as the previous, it is still very enthralling and funny at the same time. It's also the longest and biggest in scale of all the short's climaxes, starting from around the halfway point, and it just keeps going and gaining momentum until the final showdown between Gromit, Shaun and Preston, which almost feels like a set piece from an old platforming video game, and it's awesome, if a bit intense for a kids movie, but hey, at least there's no guns this time. This short also upgraded the ambitious qualities of the last special, with incorporating more impressive camera movements, set pieces, and now introducing the now staple of Aardman animation, all the little details, such as the signs in the background and all the little gadgets Wallace has on in his house, which are always charming little Easter eggs to find. They experimented with this in the last short, but it was brought to its full realization in this one, and it's great to have something like this that encourages rewatch value. This was also the first Wallace and Gromit short to introduce another staple that would become synonymous with the company, that being a group of interchangeable creatures or characters that would make great comic relief. In this movie, that comes from the sheep, of course, who are incredibly funny by just being around in odd and awkward moments, and in future Aardman productions this would be mimicked by the rabbits in The Were-Rabbit, the slugs in Flushed Away, and the elves in After Christmas. Even though by virtue of story, character moments and scale this is probably the best of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, I'd still recommend watching The Wrong Trousers over this one, since the darker tone of this might be a bit ostracizing if you haven't seen the others first. But this is still a great short, and it takes the two to the next level in terms of characters and as a franchise, but Aardman's efforts caught the sight of another up-and-coming animation company, and thus Wallace and Gromit was shelved for a few years after this for Park and Lord to move on to bigger things. And what were those things, you may ask? Well, tune in to the next episode when Aardman's partnership with DreamWorks begins.
And so now we move on to TV shows, and first we're going to be talking about the, shall I say, alternative style of Pib and Pog? Yeah, let's go with that. Pib and Pog started off as a 5-minute short by Peter Peake, who would go on to direct the second Robbie the Reindeer short, as I said before, and was originally aired on Aardman's old friend, Channel 4, back in 1995. The basic premise of Pib and Pog is basically being a spoof of a very young-orientated and I suppose somewhat educational children's show, with the characters standing in a very blank environment and having very limited movement and incomprehensible language, which is therefore interpreted to us by a very condescending narrator.
What have you been up to? You've been to the beach, Pog?
So it seems typical for the kind of stuff that you would see on CBeebies, but things take a different turn when you see the way Pib and Pog treat each other.
My Pog is in a playful mood.
That being the way that would not be out of place if Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson were substituted for these roles. So yeah, they are incredibly violent to each other, which, to be fair, it's not uncommon for children's shows to go violent with the way that the characters interact with one another, but not quite in this particular way.
Look out, Pog.
Yeah, something tells me you'd never see Shaun the Sheep breaking out an Uzi, although to be fair, if the franchise keeps going, I wouldn't be surprised if they did resort to desperate measures like that. I do always like it when people make fun of kids shows in a very dark adult way. Hell, what I'm going to be talking about next month is the absolute epitome of that. And while admittedly this doesn't go necessarily quite as far as something like, say, Robot Chicken or Happy Tree Friends, this can just be chalked up to the way that we British do our dark adult comedy. The darkness comes more from the subject matter and the dialogue rather than what is explicitly done on screen, and for the most part I think Pib and Pog work quite well in that regard. I will admit that the initial short does have its shortcomings, mostly in how the pace feels like it's really chugged down, and granted that comes from how they're trying to emulate the very slow pace of the children's shows that they're spoofing here, but it doesn't really help with the comedy in that it makes it feel like it's a bit tedious sometimes and the timing's not exactly the best. Plus the way in which Pib and Pog talk can be a little grating sometimes. sometimes. But the ways in which they think of being able to one-up each other in mutilating each other can be very creative, and almost kind of reminds me of Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry. Granted, it doesn't quite go as far as even some of the most violent episodes of Tom and Jerry, but it's still pretty fun to watch. Not to mention, when Pib and Pog break character at the end of the short and start talking like old-fashioned Shakespeareanly trained actors, is actually legitimately funny.
Okay, lovies, that's a wrap.
Phew. Thank goodness. I don't mind telling you, darling, I'm absolutely pooped. I don't expect Morph has to put up with these kind of conditions. What a dreadful ham.
Even more funny now as an adult, considering that a lot of actual children's performers from my generation actually did have a lot of proper old-fashioned acting training, so it's even funnier to imagine that this is actually what they were getting up to when the cameras were off. And it's somewhat funny to imagine if this was actually a real children's show. Although apparently whoever at Aardman actually runs their YouTube channel didn't quite understand the joke, since these shorts are actually advertised as being part of the For Kids section of the website, which granted the first short doesn't really go into too much in terms of adult content, but that certainly changes with some of the other shorts that they did a few years later. Yes, in 2006 they decided to make a few more shorts of these, shall I say, endearing characters, and while the first short didn't quite go into anything that was overtly adult, the more modern ones certainly break that barrier with discussing things like heroin, pornography.
It's a film about a donkey. I do hope that it's Muffin the Mule.
And something that no child or indeed any human should be subjected to. The X Factor. And these shorts are on the Aardboiled YouTube channel and are listed as being for kids. Yeah, someone at Aardman needs to check what's going on there. Although to be fair, with the Elsagate fiasco that happened a few years ago on YouTube, I suppose it could be worse. Even more upsettingly, the new shorts don't have Pib and Pog break character like they did in the end of the original short, which is really disappointing considering I think that was the funniest part of the original short. But they are still very fun shorts, and it's always interesting to see Aardman getting into more adult stuff. Admittedly, we've never seen them quite go all the way in terms of something you could see on Adult Swim, though you could argue that's probably for the better. But still, it is actually quite an interesting show. Not one of their best, I'll grant you, but it's certainly better than some of the other things we're going to be highlighting later in this year's Aardmay. But the next one we're showing definitely is something that is very funny, very appropriately enough.
Rex the Runt was Aardman's first attempt at making something explicitly adult, and while yes, Creature Comforts was a bit more matured compared to Wallace and Gromit and Morph, a child could still watch it and enjoy it. Rex the Runt, on the other hand, was something that Aardman made specifically for adult viewing, and while the content of the show is certainly not as raunchy or morbid as something you would see in a Viz comic or on Adult Swim, it is something that manages to be an adult show, but still manages to incorporate the great charm and non-threatening style of Aardman that has been the backbone of its company since the beginning. As I hinted in the Creature Comforts episode, Rex's design was first shown in the lip sync episode Ident, and given how insane and terrifying that short was, it was nice to have a familiar face to see in all that nightmare. Actually, I hesitate to call this nightmare fuel because this is eerily similar to what my nightmares actually looked like, just with less man-eating whales and university flashbacks. Rex the Runt is a show about 4 plasticine dogs, the titular neurotic Rex.
Hello, I'm Rex, and welcome to my world. Scanning the financial pages, and it says that if you're smart, you can make the money work for you.
The Socky and mellow Wendy.
Been around since the war.
That wouldn't make him that old in cartoon dog years. Bob, I have to tell you this. You're a big, fat, jelly, wobbly, fat bastard, Bob.
The large but kind and simple bad Bob.
Tell me our coordinates.
Over the Pacific. There you are.
What time is it?
Dinner time.
How much fuel we got left?
We're gonna run out now.
And the crazy Vince.
Clenches. It's just like Butlins. Thomas had a headache.
La 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 la.
Oh, won't you please surrender?
And the plots are kind of hard to describe since the writing style is all over the place in the series, but the best way I can describe it is imagine Ed's world but a bit more subdued and with stop motion animation. The best I can do to describe it is that it's a show where the 4 characters are running their own TV show and basically try to make as many surreal jokes and comedy setups that they can, regardless of if it makes sense or not, but does it in a way that is a lot more accessible than you might think. Rex himself is the brainchild of Richard, however you pronounce his last name, who had previously worked on the first Robbie the Reindeer short film, which did have a very similar sense of humour, and also explains why Wendy has boobs, since it seems to be a trait of his animation style. And while he did work with Aardman before, this was his first attempt to make something that was truly all his own. And it's interesting how much of his sense of humour is different from Park and Lord's. The show used a lot of surreal and meta humour, though unlike Basil Brush, the whole show was done with a very slow and calm style, so it's definitely something that you could watch with your slippers up on a buffet with a cup of tea. And its tone and pace is one that I wish more adult shows would go with. Don't get me wrong, I love the next hyperactive, gory and insane Adult Swim show as much as the next guy, but sometimes it's nice just to have a calm, relaxing tone while still having some naughty jokes. Simply put, if Adult Swim is like watching Robin Williams or George Carlin do stand-up, Rex the Runt is like watching Eddie Izzard or Ricky Gervais do stand-up.
And that's fucking weird too, and there's been porn for centuries. Was there radio porn? Was there George Burns going, well, teabag me, Gracie? I don't know.
And we built up empires. We stole countries. That's what you do. That's how you build an empire. We stole countries with the cunning use of flags.
Everything was peaceful. Everything beautiful. God made human beings too, and he wanted them to be good like himself. Arrogant.
The sense of humour in Rex the Runt can be so random and bizarre that it reminded me a lot of Monty Python, and like I said in last year's Aardmay, Aardman would eventually adopt this sense of humour into their films, as I said that the Pirates movie had a very similar sense of humour, but it was nowhere near as insane as this. But part of the reason that the humour works so well is how subdued and almost monotone the characters' voices are. It makes it seem like they're totally unimpressed with all the madness that goes on in their daily lives, which is something that, again, really works with how British and low-key the tone of this show is in contrast to the high-concept writing and animation. It's that perfect collision of the two completely opposite ends of the spectrum that Aardman always does so well. Also, a few cameos from other Aardman characters and famous actors and comedians is always a treat.
Oh! Don't even think about it.
So these 3 dogs went into a pub. The first one was a husky. Oh no, that's not right. They were in a boat.
Keep going straight and don't look back. The horror. The horror. And don't hog the middle lane.
My first TV special was all live. Live! Oh, yes. To stay youthful, you've got to have spiritual discipline. Look at this.
Granted, the sense of humour in Rex the Runt is very particular, and not everyone is going to get it. Hell, in some cases even I don't get it. But much like anything else Aardman makes, the visual appeal really helps compensate sometimes for the writing, and given how outlandish Rex the Runt can be with its animation and visual style, that suits me perfectly, since at least you've got something interesting to look at even if you don't agree with the jokes or dialogue. That being said, while the fluency and craft of the animation is as great as always, in fact the smooth and fluid motions of the animations is almost too good for a TV show. The design of the models is very different than usual, in that the characters are almost completely two-dimensional, but that actually works for this show, since it adds to the surreality and gives it more of a sense of being a wacky cartoon, since fully 3D detailed models might have been a contrast with the sense of humour. They also use some real-life objects, or at least some very real-looking facsimiles, in the show's animation, which I think is the first time Aardman ever did that, with the exception of Morph, but that's just because it was set on a desktop, and the Peter Gabriel music video for Sledgehammer, of course, which Richard, I headbutted my typewriter to come up with my last name, also worked on. It's a show where the writers are really just having a laugh and don't care about consistency or making sense, which to me is summed up by how Bob's eye patch keeps switching sides between every scene. But because of that, combined with its more laid-back feel, it feels like a show you can just put on any time, and it's got a great sense of enjoyment and fulfillment to it, regardless of what episode it is. It's like a stop-motion TV version of a newspaper comic strip in that regard, though unlike a comic strip, there is some continuity between some episodes. jokes, which is a bit of an odd choice for a show like this, but it does work, and the show really isn't about story, it's about jokes. So really you could watch it at any point and not really need to understand what's going on, unlike comic books or sci-fi shows. Overall, while Rex the Runt is a show that is really hard to describe what exactly it is, and even more hard to say if you would actually like it, I'd still recommend you check it out. Even though it is weird, I bet that there's something in it that will intrigue you. And if I'm wrong, I am happy to reimburse you.
£10, all right?
You know, I thought I could make it through life without having to watch this show, but then I decided to do a series where I look at Aardman's franchises, so now I have to. Well, I guess I don't have to, nobody's really making me do this but myself, but I am a stickler for efficiency, so here it is, Angry Kid.
Big bada boo bum poo lumpy bum. Na 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 na. No! Oh god, it's the bone. Oh no, look at the bone.
Is that enough? Can I move on to the next one now? No? Alright, let's get into this. Angry Kid is the stop-motion series made by Darren Walsh, who also voices the titular character. The best way to describe this series without using the term ginger fuckwit is think of a reverse version of Morph. Whereas Morph was unthreatening, sweet and suitable for all ages, Angry Kid is obnoxious, juvenile, annoying and gross. So in many ways it would be a perfect show for kids, except it's not made for kids. It's an adult series. Although that's a bit of a false statement, because while it is something that is marketed towards the older demographic, it's more something that's made for teens really, and fits that mold perfectly in being something that is brainless, aggravating, and scarring for anybody under the age of 13 years old, but far too immature for anybody who is over the age of 17. The series itself is about the titular character acting like a typical teenage shithead, getting into trouble with his parents at school and just being an all-around tosser, complete with a terrifying design and really creepy animation style that just makes this an ugly and disgusting show to watch. And that's not even getting into the writing of the show, which can be best summed up with kid does something annoying and stupid, and then the episode continues for another minute or two, without so much as even anything involving a punchline even coming close to any part of the show. Even Morph had better comedic structure than this, and that was a show made for toddlers. Now to be fair, I don't demand that shows that are aimed for the teenage demographic to be brimmed full of intelligence, wit and sophistication. Hell, one of my favourite shows as a teenager was The Angry Video Game Nerd. But while James Rolfe's flagship series could be described in a very similar way to The Angry Kid, which is fitting since they both share the first word of their series name, it is something that had levels of intelligence, self-aware and restraint to it. I mean, it was a review show after all, but while the review portion was more of a background thing to complement the crude jokes and angry persona, it was still a fundamental part of the show, and it allowed for a good grounded contrast to the more outlandish parts of the series, and both were given equal amounts of focus to keep the show balanced. Angry Kid doesn't have anything to provide balance to the obnoxious humour, it's just noise, gross out humour, and as I said before, really creepy animation. The animation of the series is something that really surprises me in how crap it is, but I will give the show credit in that it must have been hard, since they are still using stop motion, but by having actors wear masks that they can alter, while the actors have to keep the rest of their body perfectly still and moved ever so slightly to match up with the facial movements. And I feel so sorry for those actors, because that must have been a complete nightmare to have to do. And all for a show like this. It's also fine to think that the process of Rex the Runt's animation was far more simpler and had much more basic designs to it, and yet it was still infinitely nicer to look at. And to be fair, I do kind of get the idea that the show was meant to look a little bit ugly to match with the style of humour that the show uses. There is a difference between fun ugly and just being plain fugly. And for me, the show just isn't fun or interesting enough to break past that illusion, and is just not nice to look at. I will give the show credit on how, for as much as I've bashed it, it's not something that's trying to appeal to me. It's something that's trying to appeal more to the demographic that want to see gross, obnoxious comedy. And to be fair to it, it achieved that with gusto, because I remember episodes of the Angry Kids series being passed around like Pokemon cards on people's phones when I was at school. Then again, they also did the same with porn, and I'd much rather watch that instead. At least that's got more visual appeal to it. I will also admit that there are a few times where the show could make me laugh, but it's usually during the really short and simple episodes too, like the Countdown episode. Those can be funny in just how simple and subtle they can be, but sadly those words are lost on the Angry Kid. But at least the episodes in question are mercifully short, but with how slow the humour can be sometimes, it makes 1 minute long episodes feel like 20 minutes. Thankfully, now that I've reviewed this series, I don't have to look at it ever again, and I do apologise for this episode being a bit shorter than the rest of the series, but while a picture is worth 1,000 words, that doesn't mean people want to hear all of them, especially in regards to this piece of crap. But now that it's done, we can move on to stuff that is more worthwhile to watch. Like shows where characters don't talk, which is something that I wish this series did.
After their success with the first 3 Wallace and Gromit shorts, Park and Lord were invited to join DreamWorks and make movies for them. Park pitched the idea of The Great Escape with chickens, and Spielberg loved the idea, and the two got to work immediately to bring this idea to life. And so, in 2000, we were given the full-length stop-motion animated classic, Chicken Run. Many people often praise Chicken Run for being the first fully stop-motion animated feature film, though that's not technically true. Creator of the California Raisins commercials, Will Vinton's The Adventures of Mark Twain, was actually the first, but Chicken Run was the first one to get major mainstream attention, and to this day is still the highest grossing stop-motion animated film of all time. But does it really deserve to be that praised? Well, let's find out. On an intensive chicken farm in the 1950s run by the terrifying Mrs. Tweedy and her long-suffering husband Mr. Tweedy, the pair keeps several chickens to run a floundering egg business. But it's definitely not all sunshine and roses for these hens, with their squalid living environments and the constant threat of an axe hitting their neck if they can't lay eggs anymore. Their lives are miserable. So the spunky, kind and determined chicken Ginger, voiced by Julia Swahala, tries time and time again to break them all out and try and reach their proverbial paradise. But unfortunately she is met with failure every single time, and yet her head is never cut off, but there you go. After another failed attempt and another one of their friends being given the chop, all hope seems lost. That is until Ginger spots a Rhode Island red rooster flying, and subsequently crashing, into the farm, and gets the idea to get the chickens to fly out of the farm too. With the help of the cocky cock Rocky, played by Mel Gibson, the race is on to get the fat birds into the air, as the Tweedies have come up with a more pastry and gravy based fate for the chickens that spells disaster for them all. One of the biggest problems that Aardman had when starting to go into full-length movies is that a lot of their plots they used for the films were rather derivative and predictable, considering that the plots of their shorts, despite being smaller, seemed more interesting and unique, and sadly this film is where that trend started. But that's not because of the similarities to The Great Escape, since very little about this movie is comparable to that movie. It's how it used plot devices and beats that we've seen in tons of other movies before, which I won't give away here. And while they're done a little bit better here than in others, it does mean that if you're familiar with these beats, you know exactly what's going to happen from the first 20 minutes. Despite that though, a lot of this movie still feels very unique and has some great scenes in it. From the scenes where the chickens are trying to learn how to fly, to Rocky saving Ginger from the pie machine, which again looks like something out of a video game, and as always, one hell of a climax. And of course, one of the things that makes these scenes so good are the characters. Ginger is really likeable due to her kind heart and determination. Bunty, played by the great Imelda Staunton, is great as the group cynic.
What haven't we tried yet?
We haven't tried not trying to escape.
Babs, played by Jane Horrocks, is lovely in her innocence and endless quotability.
I don't want to be a pie. I don't like gravy.
Fowler is enjoyably curmudgeon-y. Timothy Spall's Nick is a great little Tom, Dick and Harry style side character.
The tension's killing me. He's gonna kill her.
Plus, any role that he does is automatically gold. And Mr. Tweedy, while not having much screen time, is enjoyably stupid.
What the dickens? Oh, gnomes now.
But, of course, the character that everyone remembers is the pants-crappingly terrifying Mrs. Tweedy.
They don't plot, they don't scheme, and they are not organised.
Played by an unrecognisable Miranda Richardson, Mrs. Tweedy is a character who, despite having the traditional bizarre Aardman facial structure, commands attention and fear in any scene she's in, and that really comes across down to Richardson's amazingly cold delivery and her character's intense facial expressions. Her plan is so basic and is arguably understandable from a certain point of view, but the way she goes about it and presents it, it makes it seem totally diabolical. This woman could make the idea of feeding puppies in an orphanage seem sinister.
This will take Tweedy's farm out of the Dark Ages and into full-scale automated production.
By far one of the greatest villains in an animated film ever.
Get the chickens.
Which ones?
All of them.
I'd say the only character to really suffer is Rocky. You get the idea that he's supposed to be a wisecracking fast talker, but his delivery just doesn't seem right.
You see, over in America, we have this rule. If you want to motivate someone, don't mention death.
Like he knows what he's saying is a lie and he doesn't believe it. And I guess that could be part of his development, that he eventually learns to drop his act and just be his real self. But you don't really see any change in his personality even by the end of the film. And sad to say, I think it really comes down to Gibson's performance. And while I can understand why they got him, I think someone who's a bit more well known for playing these types of characters might have worked better, like a Jim Carrey or a Jack Nicholson, or perhaps even an Eddie Murphy. And hell, this was produced by DreamWorks, they could have gotten him. Also, with Rocky being a Rhode Island Red, his accent should be a bit more East New Yorkish, rather than Gibson's Westchester accent. But the character still has some good lines and is enjoyable to watch. I just don't think he's used to his full potential here. Despite those flaws, this movie is still really enjoyable, and despite the plot beats being very predictable, when they do happen, they really hammer in the emotion of it without resorting too much on cliches like moody pop songs and dead space in the narrative. The way the characters act is very natural, plus it helps that the whole movie has this feel of dread and death around it. It makes it all feel a lot more suspenseful, so when things look bad, it feels bad. Speaking of which, the funny thing is that despite being a cinematic film, it still feels as enclosed as the Wallace and Gromit shorts. We don't really see outside of this farm until the very end, but that actually works to its advantage. It makes the captive quality for both the characters and the audience seem more poignant. This isn't just a farm, it's a POW camp. And that makes it more clear throughout the movie that this is a place that is miserable, which does make the movie seem more dire, but it does make it seem a tad depressing at times. But whenever something tough does happen, it's picked right back up again in the next scene. It reminds me a lot of the Don Bluth films in that regard, particularly All Dogs Go to Heaven, as its main character was a lot like Rocky. And hey, there's another person who would have been better for the role, Burt Reynolds. Also, despite this still being a rather small production, the upgrade that Aardman gave their animation is stellar. The scene where the chickens are training and moving in perfect unison, and just seeing how many moving characters there are on screen, it's incredible, especially considering that this all had to be done by hand. No copying or tricks. What you see here is what was really going on in the studio. It's amazing to see, and proof that Park and Lord are such pros at this. And while the more barren environment means that we get less great background jokes that we got in Wallace and Gromit, you don't really notice that with the amazing quality and fluency of the animation, which is only getting better and better at this point in Aardman's history. Overall, even though this movie is a tad overrated in my opinion, it's still a triumph in terms of animation and home movie ambition. It shows that even the smallest filmmakers can rise to the top through hard work and creativity, and through a mixture of enjoyable characters, great set pieces, and really unique tone for a kids film. And thus the world of Hollywood was opened up to this little animation shed from England. But what would they do next? Well, stay tuned for that. And
so we end this year's Aardmay with the pair that started it all, Wallace and Gromit, with their short film series Cracking Contraptions, a series that sees the two in a much more laid-back position than we normally see them in, but they're still fun to watch none the same. Cracking Contraptions is a series where we see the two testing or using inventions that Wallace has made, but rather than the big exciting inventions from the short film series, like a rocket to the moon or a device to brainwash rabbits, they're just simple devices to do day chores, but typical of Wallace's method, they do the simplest things in the most over-the-top of ways. Like an automated shopping trolley to get cheese for them without having to leave the house, or an automatic dinner machine, or possibly the most overcomplicated machine ever, just to change the channel, though to be fair, that's still easier than learning how to use a Sky remote. Of course, being Wallace and Gromit, the inventions don't always go off as planned, and usually at the expense of Gromit. And even if they do go off without a hitch, Gromit still ends up getting the short end of the stick, as usual, which makes me wonder, why does he bother sticking around? What is it about 62 West Wallaby Street that makes him put up with all this stuff? It's really nice to see Wallace and Gromit do some more low-key adventures, since usually they're always in some high-stakes tales. Here, they're just living their daily lives. But it's still Wallace and Gromit, the two lovable characters that we love to see. And while they're not necessarily saving the world, or rescuing a damsel in distress, they're still inventing and getting into trouble, but with a more toned-down style to them. Wallace and Gromit are the kinds of characters that are so lovable, we'll watch them do just about anything and it's enjoyable, and it's just sweet seeing them have some quiet time to themselves. And it shows that even during their R&R times, things can still go wrong, but they still have great cheerful dispositions to them that keeps them going. It's also nice to see the animation of Wallace and Gromit again, and while all of these Aardman shows I've watched have had great animation, well, most of them anyway, the love and attention Nick Park gives to his beloved duo is always so diligent and imaginative, and I'm glad that he didn't cut corners for the TV show either. And while you may argue, well, it's only a few minutes long each episode, surely it can't be that time consuming, you forget just how much stuff there is moving in anything related to Wallace and Gromit. Even the first short had a ton of stuff going on at once that required an insane amount of work during the animation process. And the same applies here, like with the Rube Goldberg device in the TV episode, or the tons of moving parts on the machine in the Christmas card episode. But they also put in some new animation and camera techniques that I've never seen before from the pair, like a pole zoom. That's tricky to pull off even in live action, so I have no idea how they managed it for stop motion, but they did pull it off and it looks great. There's also an interesting bit of continuity between some episodes too, like in the dinner episode we see Wallace working on some kind of invention that looks like a robot snowman, and in a later episode we see that it was an automatic breakfast machine. That's really clever to insert little nods to future episodes like that, especially since Wallace and Gromit hardly ever acknowledge their own continuity, apart from in background gags. I will admit though that some of the puns and double entendres are a bit tiresome as they were in Were-Rabbit. I don't know why Wallace and Gromit started using them more in later episodes, but they do seem quite cheap in comparison to the more clever writing of the past shorts, although I will admit this one is a good one.
Help, Gromit, it's gone crackers!
Really, what more can I say about this series? It's Wallace and Gromit. We all know them and we all love them, with Wallace being the kind, if absent-minded man he's always been, and Gromit being the multi-skilled, long-suffering canine companion too. And even though the series is more basic compared to their larger adventures, it's still the same two lovable characters we've always seen before, just in different scenarios, which just goes to show the likability of these two characters, in how we can see them in a much different context that we usually see them in, and still be entertained by it. So yes, I really like this show and really recommend it. Oh, and I'm sure some people are going to ask me, why aren't you reviewing World of Invention? And the reason for that is quite simple. While the show does feature Wallace and Gromit and some new animations of the pair, it's really just a science documentary series with the boys pasted onto it. Remove the man and his dog and it's no different to something you could watch with Professor Cox in it, so it's really not enough to warrant a full review. And thus brings us to the end of Aardmay. And I must say, it's been really nice to have a more simple selection of material to look at this year. Rather than the flash and bang of their theatrical movies, we get the laid-back feel of TV, which really goes to show the versatility of Aardman, that they can produce material that can entertain you on so many levels. Whether it be big and exciting, or small and quiet, they can always produce something that gives you that good Aardman feel. But with that said, that's all from this year's Aardmay, and I'll see you in the next review. Bye!
And so we move on, and unlike the previous show we talked about, this is a show that I actually did grow up with, though after rewatching it, I kinda wish that I didn't. This was a show that Aardman did for CITV, because of course it was for CITV, called Planet Sketch, and as you can imagine from a title like that, it was a sketch series. Unfortunately, like most sketch series for kids back then, pretty much every sketch had the same setup and the same punchline, which naturally gets very tedious very quickly. However, unlike the sketch shows on BBC, which were mostly just boring, with the exception of Horrible Histories of course, this is just aggressively unfunny. This was Aardman's first, and as far as I'm aware, only venture into CGI in terms of a television series, but while unlike in Flushed Away, where the CGI was not all that noticeable because they more or less just copied the same style from their stop-motion movies, or After Christmas, where the design of the characters' faces looked a little bit odd, but in general the actual CGI was very good, this show just looks ugly as sin, in that really creepy way that most 2000s CGI TV shows tended to look back then, which I've gone over before in some other videos, but basically CGI TV shows didn't start to look really good until around about the 2010s. As you can see with the characters, they are designed to look like Nick Park's Aardman creations, but with a slightly more exaggerated proportion to them, since they can get away with that since they don't have to make the models being able to support themselves since they're not in the real world like stop motion characters are, but still having that very Nick Park style face to them doesn't really blend well with the more cartoony proportions. Plus the reason that Nick Park's faces work with a lot of the characters is because they do have very stocky proportions, which makes sense because they need to be in order to support the armature within them. At least they did back when he started. Nowadays armatures are a lot more sophisticated, like if you see the Leica movies you can see that they are a lot more skinny and very cartoonishly proportioned, but that's a subject for another day. Here, when you see the characters have those really skinny limbs but still very rounded bodies and that traditional Nick Park face added to them, it just looks like a mess. That, and combined with the fact that the CGI is very poorly rendered, lacks details, and just has a very bad movement style, it just looks very unpleasant. But that's the least of this show's problems. All the sketches are incredibly unfunny. You name it, they all suck. The sketch about the girl who has stuff stuck up her nose, which is just disgusting. The sketch about the pair of horses with the young one who farts at the end of every sketch, which is also just disgusting. The silly problematic Japanese fighting fish.
Slow down. Don't eat too much if you want to stay fit and hard.
Fit and dead hard.
The ninja handyman, who is also slightly problematic.
Ha! Don't forget these! Ha ha ha!
The rapping hoodies, the spacemen, they're all unbelievably unfunny and they're just unpleasant to look at and listen to for that matter. The only one that ever gets a slight laugh out of me is the dinosaur doctor, because his sketches are one of the few ones that actually feel like they have a different punchline to them. The basic setup is a doctor who is a dinosaur who tries to find an excuse to eat one of his patients whenever one comes in, but for one reason or another they end up escaping, or just through their own naivete don't realise he's trying to eat them.
Aren't you going to scream?
My hiccups. I've been hiccuping for the last 2 days, and that little shock seems to have cured me.
No, Perkins, no. This patient is too full of artificial colouring. He won't make for good eating, treating. Next!
This is actually a little bit funny. Not massively so, I'll grant you, but the voice acting from the doctor himself, combined with just how stupid some of his patients can be sometimes, it does get a little bit of a giggle at me. The rest are just absolute garbage, and quite frankly it was a waste of good animators, since clearly people working on this show had talent but it just wasn't fully utilised. The only people who seemed to actually be doing a decent job out of this were the people who came up with the theme tune, because it is a legitimately catchy theme tune. But when one of the best things of the show you have going for you is the first 30 seconds, you know it's not a good sign. So this is probably the lowest point for Aardman in terms of their TV shows, possibly even more so than Angry Kid. And I know I got a lot of backlash on how much I said I hated that show, and if you like it, fair enough, but I just really can't get into it. But take solace in the fact that I hate this one way more, and I don't think there's anybody out there who'll say that they like this one. Although I may live to regret that, who knows. And it's a tragedy as well, because Aardman has proven time and time again that they can make things that are even shorter than this show, that have more character, better jokes, and are just better made overall. And we'll be getting into those next time.
And so we come to Wallace and Gromit's magnum opus, their first and only cinematic venture. While it's certainly great to see them on the big screen, and it does result in a really entertaining film, I feel that a feature length wasn't really the thing that Wallace and Gromit were made for. But for now, let's just take a look at the plot. In the duo's ever-changing careers, they're now humane pest control, helping clear people's gardens of vegetable-munching rabbits in preparation for the big veg fest in their hometown. After finding out their enclosures that they put the rabbits in are getting a bit too overcrowded, Wallace tries to come up with a way to brainwash the bunnies so that they'll no longer like vegetables anymore, and despite some hiccups, it seems to work. That is, until a massive rash of violent veg violation happens all throughout the town from a supposedly giant rabbit, dubbed by the townsfolk as the Were-Rabbit. And of course, Wallace and Gromit get on the case to sort it out, but doing so may be a lot harder than they first imagined. As stated in the last video, one of the many problems that Aardman had when going to the medium of full motion pictures is they tended to adopt plots and narratives that were rather derivative and predictable. With Wallace and Gromit's first and only foray into film, however, that wasn't necessarily the case. The film has a plot that, for the most part, you don't really know where it's going, and that's very impressive, especially from a Wallace and Gromit story, and it results in the title characters going through the things that you never thought they'd go through before. I won't say what the big twists are here, since it would ruin a lot of the movie, but needless to say, it's definitely a change from form, and in a good way, and while some might be able to predict the plot from just the title, it still goes in directions you wouldn't expect when involving these characters. Sadly though, despite the plot being very creative and effective, one of the reasons that made Wallace and Gromit shorts work so well is that they took stories that were wacky and large in concept and shrunk them down to be more down to earth, partly due to the charming tone that these shorts were known for, but mostly due to how they were only 30 minutes long, and thus they would have a smaller scope to them, which you might think might make this movie perfect as they were able to take the story to its full potential, but it does seem a bit jarring to see a very cinematic scale in a franchise that's made its money from being very quaint and homespun. That being said, this by no means ruins the movie. In fact, it's still great to see Wallace and Gromit go through more than they ever have done before, and this could have been the perfect bookend to the franchise. Of course it wasn't, but that's neither here nor there. Also, as a side note, I feel that the behind the scenes of this movie proves emphatically better than any audience reaction how off-the-wall Aardman movies can be, in that it was going to originally be called The Great Vegetable Caper, but Jeffrey Katzenberg, the head of DreamWorks, advised against calling it that since vegetables don't test well with kid audiences apparently. Yet genetic realignment and puppets made out of Play-Doh are fine apparently. Speaking of DreamWorks, after the success of Chicken Run, they must have really let them go wild with the budget and equipment, since the sets and animation are some of the best in Aardman's history, especially near the end. And while the climax of this movie isn't quite as exciting as the previous shorts, it's very different from normal and it's still very gripping, particularly given the revelations that are made in the third act. Also, this is the largest cast of any Wallace and Gromit story. Now the whole town of Wigan is along for the ride, and while they're not as fleshed out as the side characters in Chicken Run, their vocal performances do provide a decent job in making them memorable. Helena Bonham Carter as Lady Tottington is a hilarious but charming aristocratic love interest for Wallace.
Consider yourself dumped.
Though their chemistry is nowhere near as adorable as him and Gwendolyn. Nicholas Smith as the easily fretted vicar is a great role. Mrs. Cropley from The Vicar of Dibley's actress Liz Smith does a great job as Mrs. Mulch.
Aye, and I hope they give them pests what's coming to them and all.
And of course we have the great Edward Kelsey, aka the Colonel from Danger Mouse, as Mr. Growbag.
Kiss my artichoke!
Who is always a great addition to any cast. Even Peter Kay's cameo as the police officer is a decent role.
Hey, give over!
You
mental.
Sadly, despite everything in this movie successfully capturing a very cinematic feel, the villain was not one of those things. With such a great lineup of rogues, and not just Wallace and Gromit shorts, but in the Aardman gallery in general, it's a shame that the movie villain is rather disappointing. This was Aardman's first attempt to make a more jokey villain with Victor Cordemay, and while that will work to their advantage in the future with the Toad and Queen Victoria, here it just comes off as rather disappointing, especially when he's not really that funny. Granted, he does have a few funny lines, and he is performed well, which comes down to the fact that he's voiced by Ray Fiennes, but that makes him even more disappointing given that he's played other villains so well in the past. And the thought of having him as the villain in a world as surreal as Wallace and Gromit is so exciting, and yet it's just wasted here. Then again, it would have been a bit of a far-reaching hope to imagine him as good as Ramesses and Prince of Egypt in this movie anyway. Also, this might be a bit of an odd observation, but did anyone think the innuendos near the end were a bit out of place?
I think you deserve this, Gromit, for a brave and splendid marrow.
Matron, take them away!
Overall, while the movie is by far not the best of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, I really don't think it deserves to be treated as the black sheep of the lot like it tends to be. The plot is intriguing, the scale makes the set pieces a ton of fun, and we still get the same lovable characters that we always have, but I can see why some people were disappointed in this, especially since it seems as if DreamWorks were continually interfering with the process and trying to make the movies their own, and this will be seen to a much greater extent in the next movie. Aardman's first fully CGI movie, which to this day no one's really certain if this was made that way because DreamWorks were pressuring them to make a new movie fast, or because the Aardman storage and studio building tragically burnt down around that time. Even if this movie was done with Aardman's traditional stop motion, a lot of the humour feels like something that is more DreamWorks than Aardman. Not to say that's a bad thing, DreamWorks are very good with writing, but their style of humour is a lot more, I hate to use this term, American than Aardman usually are, such as the slugs randomly singing pop songs for the purpose of filling up the soundtrack, a well-known DreamWorks staple, and having much more faster action-themed set pieces as opposed to the more laid-back character-focused scenes in the previous Aardman movies. But those traditional elements are still there, and it's nice to see some different elements in this movie compared to the previous ones. But given DreamWorks' probable interference added with the fact that it's the lowest grossing Aardman film of all time, it seems that even Aardman themselves want to forget this movie exists. But does it deserve to be forgotten? Well, let's take a look. Roddy the Rat, played by a completely unrecognisable Hugh Jackman, is a fancy rat being kept by a rich family in Kensington, and whenever the family are away, he comes out to play, and he has complete free roam of the house and seems to have everything. That is, except for company. But all that changes when out of nowhere the sewer rat Sid, played by Shane Ritchie in one of only 2 movies he's ever been in, pops up from Roddy's sink and decides to become a lodger in Roddy's house. Naturally, Roddy isn't very happy about this and tries to trick Sid into going back into the sewer where he came from by flushing him down the toilet. But Sid triple crosses him and flushes him down instead. But as it turns out, the sewers in this world are more than just poo pipes. There's a whole miniature London down there for the rats, made up of rubbish that's been sent down the river, as it were. Despite this, Roddy just wants to get home, thus hitches a ride with smuggler Rita, played by Kate Winslet, and on their way back they have to contend with the kingpin of the sewers, the Toad, played by Ian McKellen and his henchmen. This is again another story that you can see exactly where it's going once Roddy meets up with Rita. It's basically going to be an African queen / swept away story about the rich, entitled person finding something that they've always been looking for in the last place they'll look. And while it's still a good story and done justice here, it's a bit disappointing that we've just come off a movie with a very original story and now we're going back to a slightly more derivative one. That being said, the relationship between the 2 main characters is done really well. It's a bit similar to Ginger and Rocky's relationship in Chicken Run, but with one clearly being more submissive than the other, and with them being brought together and forming a relationship under slightly more forced circumstances rather than just a chance encounter, which is a very interesting dynamic and makes their development as friends all the more deeper and endearing. But of course, their journey is not without opposition. The Toad is on their backs all the way due to them stealing something of his early on in the film. The erratic and manic Spike, who reminds me a lot of Moe from The Simpsons, the passive and almost childlike Whitey, and the Toad's French cousin and sleek secret agent, Le Frog.
Bonjour.
Speaking of which, this is some of the best voice acting in an Aardman movie yet. Jackman and Winslet are almost unrecognisable in their respective roles. Ian McKellen does a great job with his booming voice as the villain, who is played more comedically compared to the previous ones. But this time it does work, plus his size and power as the literal underworld leader still makes him rather intimidating.
Hello, Rita.
Hello, handsome.
And who is this? Is your new boyfriend a waiter?
Boyfriend?
Waiter?
Andy Serkis does a great voice role like he always does and really gives life to Spike.
All right, it's time to bring out the Persuader.
The amazingly talented Bill Nighy does another great job as Whitey.
I used to work in a laboratory up top. Yeah, big shampoo job. I was dark grey when we started. Yeah. Still, it cleared up my dandruff.
And the surprising cameo of Jean Reno does a great job as the cynical and snooty stereotypical Frenchman, Le Frog.
Forgive me my warty English cousin, but this bizarre obsession with the rats, it is not good for you. You are becoming what we French call le fruitcake. You stupid English, with your Yorkshire puddings and your chips and fish. You thought you could defeat Le Frog?
Sadly, as I said earlier, while all of these people do a fantastic job, not all of the jokes they say are that great. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not saying the jokes are bad, I'm just saying that some of them really don't fit in an Aardman movie. I appreciate companies branching out and trying new things for their movies, but a lot of these jokes feels like they were put in because they got a note from DreamWorks saying, "This tested well, put it in." And I could be overestimating it, but the joke where Spike keeps hitting his nads on the pipe, or as I said at the beginning, the slugs randomly singing pop songs out of nowhere.
Lonely, I'm Mr. Lonely. I have nobody for my own.
That seems more like something you'd see in Kung Fu Panda or Shrek. And while they work fine there, ball humour and bending to the zeitgeist has never been something that Aardman is into, at least in this phase of their career. That being said, the jokes that do work are the ones that we see most often, that being how the rats utilise the things in the sewer to make their own little world. It's sort of like a dirtier version of The Great Mouse Detective or An American Tail, and I love it. And you could kind of see where this could have worked as a stop-motion film, since they could have used the real deal, like real phones, blenders and so forth. But of course, for whatever the reason is, they decide to make it animated with CGI. And they did still make it look like a traditional Aardman film, and it does work for the most part. And while the story is a bit derivative, it's still very entertaining, and there are times where they do something that you wouldn't expect them to do. Overall, while I can see that this must have been a tough movie for Aardman to make, and the fact that it barely turned a profit probably doesn't help their memory of it, I still like this movie, and I do recommend you check it out if you get the chance.
Okay, so turns out I was wrong the last time, and there is another Aardman CGI TV series, and I'd never heard of it.
Mostly because it was broadcast on Cartoon Network and I didn't have that channel growing up.
But after seeing it, I can safely say I wasn't missing out on much. The plot is nothing too special. It's set in a time that resembles 70s exploitation kung fu movies, but all the inhabitants are anthro-animals, and it focuses on the three most skilled chicken martial artists fighting against their evil fish arch-enemy. Basically, it's the plot of Super Duper Sumos but with chickens, though none of these cocks have the gumption of Master Chicken from Kung Fu Panda. I will concede this is far from the worst show Aardman has ever made. It's nowhere near as annoying as Angry Kid and not as blisteringly unfunny as Planet Sketch, but it's nothing really to celebrate over. It's just a generic action kid show with decent animation and occasionally a decent joke. The animation reminds me a lot of the 2012 TMNT series, especially due to it being martial arts related, but this is clearly nowhere near as good in look, or writing for that matter. It's certainly decent animation, and the style does have a little bit of the Aardman flair to it, and I can admit on a technical level for the time it is impressive, especially compared to Aardman's previous CGI show attempt, but it's nothing all that special now. I do appreciate how stretchy and animated it is. It can get a little grating with them having movement for the sake of movement, which can get annoying, but at least it's well made, and I like the textures and art style. It's very unique for Aardman and has a very stylized feel to it, even if it does look incredibly early 2000s, though this came out in 2007, so it was a bit out of date even when it came out. But hey, it does look good and has style to it, I'll give it that. The voice acting's good, I'll give them that as well, and some of the characters have different voices in the UK version, such as Chucky Chan, yes, seriously, and this guy has nowhere near the skills of Rugrats Chucky Chan, who is voiced by Rob Rackshaw in the UK version, who you may recognise as James from Thomas the Tank Engine and Professor from The Secret Show. The characters themselves are nothing really that sticks out with you. They're pretty typical Saturday morning cartoon archetypes. The cool black dude, the tough tomboy, the sometimes wise, sometimes goofy mentor, the weedy kid, the brat, and the egomaniacal big bad. But they're by no means annoying, and they do have some decent lines now and then. Also, the bad guy is voiced by Paul Kaye, aka the voice of Vince from Mongrels, and what I wouldn't give for Vince to be in this. I could only imagine he'd have some strong words for these chickens.
Chickens, go back where they belong. Chickens, come all the way to Hong Kong.
All the way to Hong Kong, indeed. I also want to say Rocky came up with that joke, and I am internally happy that she did, because I'm sure I would have missed that and kicked myself for doing so. Beyond that, I don't really have much to say about this. Like I said, it's just a typical Saturday morning cartoon that's done a bit tongue-in-cheek, but even in that description, there are better shows like that from this generation, like the original Ben 10 and Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. If this show was around when I was a kid, I can't imagine I would have been that interested. Granted, I was growing out of cartoons by that time, but I remember a lot of very mediocre shows like this coming out around that time, like League of Super Evil and Freephonics, and I didn't really care much for those back then either. Like I said, it's not a bad show, but nothing I'm going to come back to anytime soon, and Aardman have done much better stuff with less, which we'll be seeing plenty of next time.
He's Shaun the Sheep, he's Shaun the Sheep. He even mucks about with those who cannot bleat.
Well, after the headache I got from reviewing the last show for this year's Aardmay, I'm glad to move on to something more relaxed and enjoyable, and something that I've actually had a lot of past personal experience with. To be honest though, I did consider whether or not it was worth reviewing this, since I technically already reviewed it by looking at the Shaun the Sheep movie last year, but like I said in the last episode, I am a sucker for due diligence, and this is Aardman's most popular and long-running TV series, so it's worth taking a look at. Oh, and for those who are curious, no, I am not reviewing Timmy Time, because then I would just be reviewing the same series again, only for a much younger audience. For those who are new to both Aardman and Aardmay, Shaun the Sheep got its debut in the 1995 Wallace and Gromit short, A Close Shave, being one of the major supporting characters and eventually helping to save the day. Now, while Shaun did only appear in this short for a while, he became an exceedingly popular character, getting tons of merchandise of him, and eventually he was given his own spin-off series, which first aired on CBBC in 2007, and became one of the most popular shows of the millennial CBBC generation. Heck, you ask anyone who was a child between 2000 and 2010 who watched CBBC what kind of shows they watched, and Shaun the Sheep is definitely going to be on there. In fact, just to give a bit of context to how popular Shaun the Sheep is, you can play as him in Super Mario Maker. No, I am not kidding. In fact, one of the other reasons I hesitated to review this show is because its fan base is so huge, it's hard to know where to start, especially since Shaun has sadly fallen in with the Elsagate crowd as of late, which is unfortunate, but to his credit, it's not really the show's fault that the character has been warped by a bunch of crazy people trying to exploit YouTube. So let's wind ourselves back and just start with the premise of the series. The titular character has now moved onto a farm with lots of other sheep somewhere in the British Midlands, and is now voiced by Justin Fletcher, who viewers of the time would probably remember as being the star of the show Something Special, where he played Mr. Tumble and various other characters. A show that I am not familiar with, but one thing I do know is that the show was designed to appeal to children who had learning difficulties and communication issues. So the show involved a lot of mime, vaudeville, slapstick and body language, which might make you think, well, why was this guy hired for a voice role? He barely speaks in his own show. But that's actually the genius of hiring him, because while he may not speak, he does have to do a lot of pantomime style verbalization, and that was a perfect choice for Shaun the Sheep, because that's what the show is about too. All the characters, the other sheep, Blitzer the dog, the farmer, and any other characters that show up, do not speak a single legible word. Instead, they all murmur and mumble incoherent phrases and sounds. While they partake in various small adventures on the farm with his flock and other animals that live on the farm, often which are very simple in concept but are made very wacky and silly through the way they progress. And being the episodes are just little over 5 minutes long, the typical Aardman TV running length, it means that the show is basically just a series of nice simple sketches that can be enjoyed by just about anyone, much like Morph was. Which it's great that Aardman always goes for the general pleasing sense with a lot of their films and TV shows, because they do it really well, and all the more fitting since the company is based out of Bristol, which if you've ever been there, you'll know that that really fits with the mood of the town. The series' main backbone though are its characters, who despite not being able to talk, have a great amount of personality and charm to them. There's Shaun himself, who is the leader of the flock, and while often acting as the voice of reason, he also has a knack for mischief and being a bit of a smart aleck. There's Blitzer the dog, who, like Shaun, acts as the voice of reason, but also likes to delve in more boisterous activities, but he's got a lot more on the line if he messes up, since he's always under the vigilant eye of the farmer, who is the main authority on the farm, but is rather absent-minded and sometimes childish too. Then there's the jerky pigs, the jealous cat, and the other members of the flock, who are all incredibly enjoyable and likeable. I think what makes this show so great is how they're able to do so much with so little, which is always a great skill that Aardman has, but anyone who's lived on a farm or has been to a farm knows that while it's not necessarily quiet, it's also mind-crushingly mundane and repetitive. But they've been able to make 5 series, several spin-offs, and 2 movies out of this concept. That's unbelievably impressive, especially since I'm having trouble putting my thoughts about this show into words. I can't even imagine how hard it must have been for the writers of this show, and yet they've kept us coming back time after time. Though to be fair, the catchy theme song by Vic Reeves never hurts in doing that.
He's Shaun the Sheep, he's Shaun the Sheep, he's Shaun the Sheep, he's Shaun the Sheep. He doesn't miss a trick or ever lose a beat.
The series was directed by the creator of Rex the Runt, Richard Gobblefunk, but unlike his last show, Shaun the Sheep was a much more down-to-earth and basic show, compared to the outlandish and surreal humour of his past show, probably because Nick Park was very vigilant about how he wanted to treat his baby. But much like Rex the Runt, the series has a very laid-back and relaxed tone to it, which also worked very well, much like Rex's did. Although my comment on how the series takes simple concepts and makes them more outlandish through its execution is sort of the opposite with what Rex the Runt did, where it had outlandish concepts and did them in a very simple way, which I guess shows how 2 programs that could not be more different on the outside can be weirdly similar. Admittedly, I know that this review has been a bit directionless, but that's only because of how this show has so much great stuff in it, but also it's so remarkably simple that it's hard to know what to talk about first, middle and last. So really all I can say is go watch it yourself. It's on YouTube, iPlayer, Netflix, you find it all over the place. Though do be careful when looking on YouTube. Look for long enough and you'll find some stuff you'll regret. Trust me. But regardless of that, Shaun the Sheep has gone down in history as one of Aardman's biggest franchises, and ensures that they'll be good for cash for a long time, just as long as they don't shear it too closely.
And so we come to the last proper Wallace and Gromit film. Yeah, there were some TV shows and cameos in the future, but this is considered the true last hurrah for the duo. In their final ever-changing occupation, the pair are a very dynamic set of bakers and bread delivery men, and as usual, despite Wallace's quirky way of doing things, the pair are managing to do pretty well. However, Wallace ends up saving and falling for a former bakery spokeswoman, Paella Bakewell, and as per usual when Wallace gets a crush, Gromit gets shoved aside and ignored. But unlike the last time Wallace had a date, this one seems to be a bit more mysterious than the others, and Gromit tries to figure out her secret and subsequently save Wallace, whilst also getting the attention of Paella's poodle. Admittedly, there's not a lot to say about this special because it's basically what you'd expect it to be. The animation is still amazing, but there's not really been much improvement to the technology compared to the Were-Rabbit. The plot is intriguing, but it's the same sort of mysteries with the obvious villain from the get-go and Gromit trying to figure out the meaning behind it all. We've got the exciting set pieces, the thrilling climax and the goofy scenarios, but that's it. There's really not much to say. Not to say that that's a bad thing. Wallace and Gromit are the kind of characters in films in general where you could just watch them hook up their TV and we'd be entertained by it. They're just that likeable, so it's always great to see them back, and admittedly after the Were-Rabbit this would feel like a step back anyway, though I do always find it odd how there seemed to be very little admission of continuity between the Wallace and Gromit shorts and films, but that's another matter. It does just feel like these characters have so much potential for comedic scenarios, and I'd love to see them go on and do more stuff, but of course the want for making everything look bigger and better than their previous venture is hard when they've already done a movie, so I can't really be that wishing on the whole thing. So as is, Loaf and Death is still great, it just feels a bit like a bit of been there, done that, but we still get some great moments, a lot of new and very good meta jokes, seems as if DreamWorks rubbed off on them more than they'd like to admit, and a great villain. While the villain wasn't as creepy as the Moon Robot, as memorable as Feathers McGraw, or scary as Preston, it was nice to have a baddie that Wallace and Gromit could actually have a proper conversation with for a change, being again a great combination of funny and intimidating like the Toad, with a fantastic voice by Loose Women's and Coronation Street's Sally Lindsay, who manages to make Paella, oh yeah, spoilers, Paella's the bad guy, though really who else would it be, both entertaining but also dire in the right moments. Overall, since this is the last major thing that Ed Miliband and Ed Balls' cartoons recreation have ever starred in, it does feel like a decent bookend to the franchise, though it does feel a bit open-ended since there was potential for more adventures after this. But I imagine that with Peter Salis' ongoing age and blindness, he probably wasn't in the best of shape to keep making new shorts, hence why future Wallace and Gromit ventures were mostly cameo appearances after that. Regardless of if it seems a bit derivative from last ventures, it's still great to see the pair again one last time, but in terms of Aardman's success as an animation company, well, it'll take a few more years yet to come up with something that really makes an impact.
And now we move on to a show that I'm actually surprised I'm even covering at all here, since when I looked up that Aardman were involved with DC Nation Shorts, I just figured that they were a producer who were involved with making the series and were just helping out. But no, they actually did produce a series of their own shorts in their own style for this variety show. And I'm sure glad they did, because this is one of the funniest things I've ever seen them do. Appropriately so, because the actual series itself they did is called DC World's Funnest. Essentially, this is basically a return to their Creature Comforts format, with having a group of people, in this case all children, just give a random bunch of unconnected anecdotal testimonials about whatever they feel like talking about, and then inserting them back into animations about unrelated things.
I'm not really a sporty person. I can fly. I do running.
I don't know why he wears his pants over his costume. Maybe it's a fashion statement. He goes to karate.
However, in this case, they make it seem like it's the characters from the DC universe saying these things. This is already a really funny concept, as Creature Comforts has shown us in the past, but inserting them into very silly looking versions of Batman, Superman, or the Joker, it makes it absolutely hilarious, especially since they mostly got British kids to do this, as you would imagine. Though admittedly the guy who played Batman this year was British, and so was the last guy to play Superman for that matter, so maybe it's not that all weird. Even so, hearing these comments come out of the mouths of these characters, even if they're leaning into the comedy angle with having them look like that, is still a ton of fun, and it works because usually in Creature Comforts, the kids were the funniest part about the show.
My mum likes them, and I like them. We both like them. Lots of the superheroes wear masks to protect their identity or identity.
It's also cool to see these particular characters done in Aardman's own style, but still done with their own particular flair to them. Like with the Joker looking like Krusty the Clown, and Batman and Robin, I'm not even quite sure how to describe what they look like unless they were trying to actually emulate the way they looked in Only Fools and Horses in a stop-motion form. Admittedly, I think the testimonials used in this series are a bit more scripted than they were in Creature Comforts, as they seem to refer to specific characters and circumstances that would only fit within this setting.
Hey you! Are you the Joker?
Which admittedly, I'm not really a fan of the idea of Creature Comforts having rehearsed testimonials, but in fairness, this isn't really Creature Comforts, it's its own thing. Plus, it does actually make them quite funny. The animation also seems a little bit different from Aardman's previous style. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but the way the intro is animated has this very almost psychedelic feel to it, like they're not made out of plasticine anymore, they're made out of liquid. It looks really strange, but also really cool. The animation in the series itself is a bit more typical than what you would expect from Aardman, but I don't know, something about it looked a little bit different. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about the motions and the actual shape of the various characters, something about it just seems a bit different, but I like it. Admittedly, I would have liked to have seen what they would have done if they had them look more like if they were in a serious DC show, so having them be more realistically proportioned and having them look more cool but still say these things like they were children. That would have been a lot more fun, though I suppose in a way that's what the Lego Batman movie was about, so I guess we did get that after all. I am so glad that Warner Brothers approached Aardman to do this because it's a really odd idea, but it really worked, and it's always good to see DC poking fun at themselves because they do tend to take themselves a lot more seriously and are less inclined to make fun of themselves or have a sense of humour about their own world. So it's great to see them actually willing to poke fun at themselves. But it's always good to see an Aardman show that is always really funny. Unfortunately, the next one we have on this year's Aardmay can't quite make that same claim.
While the friendly tiffs between Park, Lord and DreamWorks have been well publicised, how much they disagreed creatively was never very well publicised. As such, it seems as if they were eager to get away and be more of their own entity, though whether Sony has proven to be better for them for that, we still don't know. But they have made some of their best movies under them in recent years. After they separated, Aardman went to go on to work for Sony Animation, which they still do to this day, but it seems that they weren't quite finished with experimenting with CGI films, as their first venture with Sony was a movie that looks very different from any movie they've done before. But before we get into that, let's take a look at the plot. At the North Pole, Father Christmas, aka Santa for you Atlanteans out there, played by Jim Broadbent, and his team are doing what you'd expect them to do, sorting out presents for the children of Christmas. But the old rustic sleigh and reindeer method seems to have been phased out for more modern techniques, such as a retro-reflector giant spaceship, thousands of elves doing most of the work while Santa fumbles about aimlessly, whilst his eldest son Stephen, played by Hugh Laurie, does most of the coordinating. Thus Santa seems to be more of a techno postman than he used to be, as is the thoughts of his father, Grand Santa, aka the previous Santa Claus, played by the graciously returning Bill Nye. However, there is one person at the pole who still embodies the heart and magic of Christmas, Santa's youngest son, Arthur, played by James McAvoy, who deals with the millions of letters that Santa gets every year. He loves his job and gets to see what all the children love and cherish about Santa think of him, and his endlessly optimistic demeanour means that he's always got a smile on his face. However, due to a technical hitch, a child gets missed on the register. Steve wants to do nothing as his bureaucratic sensibility makes him feel as if there's nothing nothing they can do, and the job's done anyway, and Santa just blindly agrees with him. But Grand Santa tells Arthur that there is a way, and thus it's up to Arthur, Grand Santa, and an elf that's stowed away named Bryony, played by Ashley Jensen, to get the present to the girl before morning. What's really great about this movie is that it's the first Aardman movie to technically have no villain. I mean, there are arguments to be made towards Steve and possibly the military near the end, but neither are really true villains. Steve is just a character who wants something really badly, becoming the new Santa, and while he does do some arguably sinister things, he never goes full-on antagonist, and the military are just trying to do what they think is a good thing. They just lack the context to know what they're really doing. And so it's amazing to truly get that Christmas spirit in this movie, that everyone in the movie makes mistakes, but the other characters help them realize that and help them fix them, and by the end of the movie they're all better people as a result, which is a brilliant way to make a kids movie, especially a Christmas one. That sense of, yeah, you're a bit of a dick, but hey, we can all be, let me just give you a hand, is so British, and it's a great lesson to give to kids and even adults. Plus it really hammers in how important the giving and selflessness of Christmas is, and it's one of the best looking Christmas movies I've ever seen, even if a lot of the locales they go to don't necessarily reflect that, but I'll get into that later. But it does look undoubtedly jolly and festive most of the time, and that's one of the things that makes me love this movie so much. But the other thing is the characters. While this is a bit more of an expansive cast than most Aardman movies, they do all do fantastic jobs. McAvoy's voice is a bit annoying at times, but his optimism and innocence makes him really likeable. Plus, McAvoy's a fantastic actor, and he really sells the more emotional moments.
How can I ever write another letter saying that Santa cares?
Jim Broadbent proves his worth once again as one of the greatest character actors and Santa actors of all time with his performance.
Here's to me, doing an even better job next year.
Hugh Laurie, while seeming to phone in some bits of his performance, does work in regards to this character, and he has some of the funniest moments in the film.
My S1 festifies the world at 1,860 times the speed of sound.
A returning Imelda Staunton plays Santa's wife, who is a great background character who is clearly totally in control of her life and loves it.
Trellieu's on a course of 187.7 degrees from the geographic pole, but as it's the old sleigh, we should allow a drift margin of 1,000 miles either side of the Greenwich Meridian. I've got a sweater for Arthur, your father's pills, and some nice sweet tea.
Bryony is also a tad annoying and not one of the strongest characters, but she does have her moments. But by far the best character in the movie is Grand Santa.
Don't matter what you come up with, son. You may be the next in line, but you'll never get to be Santa unless you knock him off.
Once again, like everything he does, Bill Nighy does an incredible performance as this curmudgeonly, slightly bigoted, stubborn old fart who is still incredibly lovable and has the best lines in the movie by far.
It's impossible.
They used to say it was impossible to teach women to read.
He's also great at providing exposition in the history of the clauses, which are the moments that I always have a great time hearing, and it makes me want to hear more about the history of this family. Seriously, how has that not become a spin-off yet?
I've seen this before. Sleigh fever, they call it. Pressure of Christmas sends a man doolally-tap. Santa Claus the 16th got it 1802. Every child that year got a sausage nailed to a piece of bark.
There's also some really cool cameos in the movie too, such as Michael Palin, Eva Longoria, and even my old Chancellor Sanjeev Bhaskar, all of whom do great jobs, even despite having less than 5 minutes of screen time between them. All of these actors and actresses do great jobs, not just with the jokes, but making these characters seem real, not just caricatures, even if some of the voices like Laurie's are a bit jarring in how they sound no different from their real selves. This is a movie that sadly has only recently hit its stride in its popularity and people realising how popular it is. Oh, don't get me wrong, it was very successful when it came out, but it came out around about the same time as The Muppets and Hugo, so not a lot of people saw it at the time. It's only been until recently when people have started to see it and realise how great it is. It's also nice to see Aardman do a road trip style movie. We saw shades of that and Flushed Away, but the sewer sadly doesn't lend itself to many exciting locales. But with Santa's sleigh, we can literally go anywhere, and they really do take advantage of that opportunity, visiting places like Kenya, Mexico, and even Canada.
Toronto's in Canada! The Santas always come through Canada! Nobody lives here!
and I always love this narrative in films. I don't know what it is about it, but a literal journey just seems to bear the most opportunities in storytelling. There are some downsides to the movie though. Firstly, while the use of details, motion, and most of the other little details about the animation are stellar in this movie, the designs and faces do look rather odd. I don't know how much of that was either Aardman or Sony, but it does look a tad creepy, which puts this up there with the Polar Express and the Rankin Bass movies in terms of creepy animated Christmas movies. That, and I feel that there was some lost potential with how the world perceives Santa, as some people in the world, most specifically the military, don't even seem to know that Santa is even a thing. I don't mean that they're not believing, I mean it's like they've never heard of the guy, which is weird. And I do really wish we could hear more of Grand Santa's adventures in the history of the clauses, but I guess that's the sign of a great movie. You just want to see and know more about it. Overall, After Christmas is an amazing movie and really deserves to be a new Christmas staple, and this was a great first movie for Aardman's collaboration with Sony, and more for Sony than Aardman, since it's nice that they have some good animated movies in their portfolio, but of course it was only a matter of time before Aardman got back to their roots, and next year we'd see one of the biggest and best examples of that. And now we come to my favourite Aardman movie, which is once again one that people tend to forget about, as it's sandwiched between the two more popular Aardman movies of the Sony era. But is there a reason why people forget about this movie? Well, let's take a look. In the receding days of piracy, Queen Victoria, played yet again by Imelda Staunton, does she have anything else better to do with her time? Is desperate to rub out what little remains of the pirate menace, but she's got to contend with the one and only pirate captain, played by an unrecognisable Hugh Grant.
Behind every captain, with glittering eyes and a luxuriant beard, the crew of Briny Road.
But PC has his own agenda, as he's desperate to win the Pirate of the Year award, which is continually won by his rivals Pegleg Hastings, played by Lenny Henry, Barbados Liz, played by Selma Hayek, and Black Bellamy, played by Jeremy Piven. After several desperate and failed attempts to gain gold, his number two, played by Martin Freeman, encourages them that it's not all about the treasure, it's about the adventures. But they still need that booty, so they raid one last ship, which just so happens to be the Beagle, as piloted by Charles Darwin, played by David Tennant. After a little misunderstanding, Charles makes the pirate captain a deal. He'll give the pirate captain all the gold he wants if he's allowed to present the captain's pet dodo Polly to the Queen as a scientific discovery. The captain agrees, and the crew head off to London to contend with the police, scientists, Charles's chimp butler Mr. Bobo, and the Queen herself, all for a little recognition. I think what makes this my favourite of the Aardman movies as of yet is two things. One, it's got my favourite cast of any Aardman movie yet, and two, while the story is a little bit of a retread of the plot of Chicken Run, it actually manages to put a new spin on it, and for the most part it has a very unpredictable plot, making it one of the more unique Aardman films. While you can imagine some of the plot beats that are going to happen, as the movie progresses, it's like it goes out of its way to take your predictions and completely throw them in the bin and do the opposite. For example, Charles many times tries to betray the pirate captain, and you'd expect halfway through the movie that he'll realise what he's doing and stops. But no, he actually goes through with it, and while he does learn his lesson in the third act, it's surprising that he did actually get away with his plan, for the most part. Another example is the jokes. These are some of the most surreal jokes we've seen in the Aardman films, and it reminds me a lot of Monty Python's Flying Circus, or even a TV show they did, Rex the Runt, and the majority of them are hilarious.
People who live alone are always serial killers.
Some are a bit too odd, like during the sad moment Jermaine Clement starts singing a song that spoofs the typical third act come down of consequences, and while I do normally love Jermaine Clement, this isn't one of his better songs, and it does come off as trying too hard to be meta.
I'm not upset because you left me this way. My eyes are just a little sweaty today. They've been looking around a lot, searching for you.
which has never been one of Aardman's strongest style of humour, but most of the time the jokes really work, if they're not raising the attention of certain communities, that is. One thing about the movie that's both hilarious and irritating doesn't even have to do with the movie itself, it's the advertising for it. One of the biggest jokes in the trailer is when the pirate captain boards a ship asking for gold, but the passengers of the ship reluctantly tell them that it's a leper boat, and one of the passengers' arms falls off as a result.
Gold? Afraid we don't have any gold, old man. This is a leper boat. See?
However, despite this being how they actually treated leper sufferers back in the days of piracy, the leprosy community, and no, I'm not joking about that, got up in arms, excuse the pun, about how this was offensive to their people, and so when the movie was released, they changed the line to plague ship.
Gold? This is a plague boat, old man. I'd give my right arm for some gold. Or my left.
This is hilarious in the idea that there's even a leper community and that they are so well publicised and that they were able to get a movie that couldn't be reanimated changed, but also in how they got offended by a joke that is not only accurate, since this is how they used to treat lepers, and while I'm not saying it was the right thing to do this, they had no way of treating lepers back then, so they had to do this to stop it from spreading, but also in how it's really not that offensive. But that's just from my point of view, and I've never had leprosy, so I wouldn't know. But it still makes me think that this, quote, controversy was actually started by a bunch of self-important SJWs trying to speak for a bunch of people they hadn't even met. Now, I could be wrong about that, and if I am, I do apologise, since the World Health Organisation and the UK-based Lepra charity were two of the groups listed as having complained about this, but it just feels like that's what happened. It's also interesting to see Aardman try their hand at 2D animation with the map scenes. They've done 2D animation before, but never in one of their bigger productions, and it looks great, even if they are very small moments. The movie has also got a lot of callbacks to previous Aardman films, such as the stairway sequence is very reminiscent of the hallway train chase in The Wrong Trousers, the battle in the kitchen at the end is very reminiscent of the fight with Paella in The Loaf and Death, and even the idea of an evil woman trying to kill a bird is very familiar to Mrs. Tweedy from Chicken Run. Speaking of which, while she does have trouble deciding whether she wants to be a serious or jokey villain, Queen Victoria is a great baddie, and a lot of that comes down to her performance by Imelda Staunton. Imelda has always had a gift for playing lovably hateable characters, as evidenced as how she played a character even more detestable than the Dark Lord himself in the Harry Potter films with Dolores Umbridge, and Queen Victoria is very comparable to said character, and it's a great addition to the Aardman Rogues Gallery, even though I do wish that her more comedic moments were downplayed, since she could have been as intimidating as Mrs. Tweedy. To this day, I'm still not quite sure why people didn't like this movie. Maybe it's because the general public were bored with the Aardman style. I mean, this was around the time when Leica animations were starting to gain steam, so maybe they were being outdone by them, or perhaps to the more emotionally gripping movies they've done in the past, this one felt a lot more like a downgrade. But really, who cares? It's just meant to be a fun comedy, and in that regard, I love it. It's definitely a highlight of the Aardman portfolio in my books, but sadly for the company itself, it was a bit of a disappointment. But come 3 years later, and one of the most surprisingly popular movies with no dialogue will be unveiled to the world. After the success that the character had in A Close Shave, Shaun the Sheep was the next big thing for Aardman after Wallace and Gromit. After a few years of throwing ideas around, they made a TV series based off of this beloved little lamb, which eventually led to the movie we're talking about today. The series was a great way of Aardman experimenting with a format that they had fiddled with before, but this time they went all out with it. Silent comedy. The Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton style of vaudeville slapstick that only had the characters speak using noises and vocalization, and it was a great success. I remember watching this show, and while admittedly I would watch things like Batman and Power Rangers more, this was still a great show. It was funny, sweet, with all the fun of the great Aardman charm, and it lasted an impressive 5 series with a spin-off Timmy Time on CBeebies. For those who aren't aware of the show, it focuses around the continuing adventures of Shaun the Sheep, the level-headed cool sheep from A Close Shave, played by Justin Fletcher now.
is now the leader of a flock of sheep and a farm, run by the farmer, and that's not me being lazy with not looking up his name, he doesn't actually have one, and he and his flock go out on all sorts of misadventures right under the farmer's nose without him noticing, often resulting in the sometimes antagonist and sometimes ally Blitzer, the farmer's dog, getting roped in to make sure the farmer doesn't find out about the shenanigans that are going on. Simple but enjoyable hijinks. And so we come to the movie, and we definitely go to the next level, or town in this case for this one. Shaun and the flock are getting bored of their repetitive life and they want a break, so they engineer a plan to get the farmer out of the way and do what they feel like. However, it goes tits up, as you'd expect, and the farmer ends up being sent into a nearby town, and through some unfortunately placed balls, gets amnesia, so he can't remember who he is or what he does. The sheep naturally get upset about this, and they go into the city to find the farmer and re-jog his memory, all while trying to keep a low profile to avoid the sinister animal control man, A. Trumper, voiced by Omagility. First of all, it's nice to have an Aardman movie that goes back to the simple stories and minimal elements, much like the old Wallace and Gromit shorts, and the fact that the whole movie is made via non-verbal pantomime makes it fit all the better, since a large, grand, epic scale wouldn't have fitted with that motif, much like how The Artist, despite being a very well-made movie, did feel very small in scale, and it fit the style, as it does here, and the animation, while still up to the quality of their most recent films, looks a lot more basic, and it really works, and it made me realise that Aardman really works with being more simple. I love it when they go big, but these more low-key movies do really show off their craft and talent to the best of their ability. Some of the models do look a bit too old school for Aardman though, which does contrast a bit with the more detailed models of the farmer and the pest control guy. In fact, some of them even look like characters from a Will Vinton movie, and as much as I love Will Vinton, I don't ever want to see those two stop-motion worlds collide.
What's your name? Satan.
This movie also feels the most British out of the Aardman movies, with its so much more modern British iconography. It genuinely feels like you're in a town in the UK, with the NHS hospital, the buses, the choices of music, even the references they do, which aren't that many, but the ones they do are very British, and it's great. They do a fantastic job with the expressions in this movie, which is especially impressive since I've always thought that the traditional Aardman models give a very limited range when it comes to showing expressions, but in here, a movie where the expressions are very important, they are very good and very deadpan. Actually, the animation in general is great, and it's lovely to return to the painted backdrops instead of the CGI ones, which is great to see again. And the whole thing feels like an older Aardman project. It reminded me a lot of The Wrong Trousers, especially with the Manchester-like city setting and the scenes where the sheep are leading the farmer around while he's asleep. Also, speaking of The Wrong Trousers, pause that scene where Trumper is looking at the wall of captured animals, and you'll see quite a few familiar faces in there. There are some joke setups that are very predictable, and you can tell exactly what's going to happen from the start, which does make this movie a bit of a slog sometimes, but they do still add some interesting twists here and there, like where the amnesiac farmer goes to a hair salon and has to do some hairdressing, and of course shears him like a sheep, but the guy he cuts the hair for actually does like it, and it leads to a new hairstyle phenomenon. It was predictable, but still funny, and the one character who always made me laugh was the villain, A. Trumper. Omagility is really good as A. Trumper, and yes, I can insert an obvious Donald Trump joke here, but I've done that enough in my videos, so I'll skip that for now. I'm a big fan of the former face of MoneySupermarket.com before they started using disturbingly sexy men and random 80s cartoon characters for their ads, and he does a great job with the vocalizations, and shows that even celebrities who are not used to this style of acting can be very good at it. I was excited to see him in the movie, but also slightly wary since he has got a knack for picking some stinkers in terms of movies to be in. But even with that, he often is the highlight in the bad movies he's in, and here, while the movie itself is still great, that's still no exception, and he's a great villain. He has his comedic elements, but he's very intimidating, especially near the end where he gets legitimately scary, Cape Fear style. Speaking of which, while the climax does feel more toned down to some of Aardman's former films, it's still a very tense final bout, especially since the characters rarely get into mortal peril in the TV TV show, so to see the stakes raised from the show and done effectively is a great turn. Overall, while I admittedly dismissed this movie when it came out since I thought it was just going to be a bigger budget version of the TV series, which it basically is, I see now that it's perfect for this movie, and even more so for the Aardman library. I don't know if I'd say it's my new favourite for me, but it's definitely a real treat, and so gleefully simple and charming. Definitely check it out, or at least you could have if they didn't take it from Netflix for no reason, even though most of the other Aardman movies are still on there. Thanks for that, by the way. That made trying to find this movie for the sake of this review really easy and fun. Man, Netflix can be annoying sometimes. And at last, we come to the latest and largest Aardman movie yet, Early Man. Is this a solid bedrock hit, or does it sink like a stone? In the last few years of the Stone Age, a group of Neanderthals live in a small bowl-like valley that was created after the cataclysm event that wiped out the dinosaurs. They live in peace hunting rabbits all day, but the over-optimistic member of the tribe, Doug, played by Eddie Redmayne, tries to convince his chief, played by Timothy Spall, that maybe they should think of hunting bigger animals. But his chief dismisses this as he's scared of change. However, change will be coming to the valley sooner than he wanted, as the Bronze Age has entered the valley, and they're looking for ore to mine, led by their vicious, pompous and greedy leader, Lord Nuth, played by Tom Hiddleston. After some antics, Doug ends up getting thrown into the middle of an early form of football, and challenges Nuth's team to a game for the fate of their valley. With the help of an aspiring footballer named Gunnar, the race is on to get Doug's tribe ready to go against the best players in the world, all face working down a mine for the rest of their lives.
What's a mine?
So this is a story that, excluding the cavemen, we've all heard before. The little ragtag sports team that goes up against the best and tries their best to win. And while it isn't a bad narrative, we have seen this a lot before. So what makes this movie stand out from films like Cool Running, The Sandlot and The Bad News Bears? Besides being animated and set in the Stone Age, of course. Well, for one, the cast. This is probably the biggest and most impressive cast of any Aardman movie yet. Eddie Redmayne's very soft, optimistic Doug is a great protagonist.
He said we'll spend the rest of our miserable lives working down a mine. But our ancestors played football, we know they did. I still believe we can do this.
The returning legendary Timothy Spall as the chief is great, though his performance, while good, isn't quite as standout as his performance as Nick from Chicken Run.
Couldn't we try hunting something bigger?
What? Like a hare?
But he does still do a good job as the typical fearful old man who's scared of progression. Maisie Williams as Gunnar, whose name sounds like a Scottish insult, does a good job, though she seems to have trouble with the French accent she's supposed to be doing. It seems to go in and out.
Where have you been? The Stone Age? They may be great, but what they're not is a team.
Plus, it's hard for me to like anything Maisie Williams is in, since she played one of the most annoying and boring characters in recent Doctor Who memory. But her character is fine, way better than most of the typical token girl characters in the sports movie, and she actually has a personality and is funny.
I'm nearly 32.
Okay, that is old.
And the supporting roles are great too. The IT crowd's Richard Ayoade, Gina Yashere, Johnny Vegas, Rob Brydon, they all do great jobs, though sadly they aren't really given a lot of time to be explored or be really funny, since a lot of the screen time is taken up by Doug and Gunnar. However, one screen hog of the movie that I would gladly watch for hours is the villain, Lord Nuth.
Bonds! So cold and hard and slippery.
Tom Hiddleston's Lord Nuth is one of not only his best performances, but one of the best performances in any Aardman movie ever. It feels like they mixed the Frog and Queen Victoria together, but he does bring a lot of his own elements to the role. And while I am disappointed that he's a more comedic villain again, seriously, I miss the sinister villains, he is still very funny and has a ton of memorable lines.
Stefano! Not so ham-fisted. You're going down the mine. You're going down the mine.
And he's also probably the first character in an Aardman movie to swear.
It turns out your tribe were totally crap at football.
He is by far the best part of the movie, and it made the whole movie more enjoyable, even through the most boring moments. Knowing that he'd be back made it worth it. While the focus around football is a very clever idea and gives it that British feel, I do worry that this might make the movie a bit alienated to American audiences. Then again, animated movies based around American sports aren't that great themselves. Space Jam, anyone? I will admit that they use the sport in a very clever way, referencing famous tropes and games of the past, even poking fun at the general playing attitude of various countries like Germany, France, and of course England. They even reference the old 1966 World Cup where England won, though thankfully without the typical English trope of going on about it over and over again because we haven't won since then, or mentioning the war in relation to it. Seriously, football hooligans, stop doing that. Nobody cares anymore. Though while there are a lot of good jokes in this movie, I have to say the constant puns and penis humour does tire on me quite often, especially since most of them aren't very funny.
Come on then, let's see you tackle.
But hey, a majority of the jokes are still very good overall, and there's some decent Flintstone-style humour with making modern devices out of animals and such, and the odd bit of Aardman's trademark surreal humour is still there too. And while the movie lacks the great background details of previous Aardman shorts, it does have the quirkiest and oddest sense of humour out of all of them, with giant ducks, talking rocks, football being created by a meteor that killed the dinosaurs, and Rob Brydon voiced bird messages.
You'd better not screw it up, Nooth, or else.
The animation is something that I have trouble deciding if it was the best Aardman has ever done or one of the most unbalanced. What I mean by that is that this movie uses the most CGI intermixed with stop motion out of the whole Aardman library, such as with the backgrounds and some of the more ambitious effects. But while that worked great for the Leica movies, here it's just really obvious and the kind of thing that takes you away from the world. You never get the feeling that what you're seeing is right in front of you, you just start thinking that it's all CGI. And while I'm not condemning the use of CGI, since some of the things they had to use it for were totally understandable, I do feel a lot more effort could have been put into this movie to make it look more like a traditional Aardman film. And admittedly, I'm not sure who made this happen. Since Sony has been very respectful so far to Aardman in letting them do their own thing, this does feel like something that they might have insisted on, but that's just conjecture. And despite that distraction, the parts that are traditional Aardman style do look great and are still very charming. This is also a movie that sadly suffers from a very derivative plot. It's essentially the Mighty Ducks or Bad News Bears, or for a more modern and British example, Bend It Like Beckham, the story of a plucky but underdog team trying to win the tournament with great stakes on the line. And while this is a very beloved narrative, we've seen it so many times before, and to be honest, we're kind of sick of it now, especially since, besides the Stone Age theme, this movie does very little to make it different from usual, other than the setting, and the stakes being higher than normal in these kinds of movies. So I wasn't really invested in this movie as the other Aardman movies, since while a lot of Aardman plots are a tad predictable, this one was extremely so, and really only the characters and silly jokes were enough to keep me engaged. But that being said, I am glad that I saw this movie, and I definitely will see it again in the future.
Shaun the Sheep 2, Farmageddon. In my opinion, the ideal example of how to do a sequel right. So what's the plot to this one? Well, Shaun and his friends are getting on what they always get on with. But, unbeknownst to them, an alien spaceship has landed near the farm. Because, of course it has. That's the ultimate go-to plot device for a franchise that's run out of ideas, introduce space and aliens into it. And the pilot of which is a small alien known as Lula, and has made her way to the farm, and as expected with most kinds of aliens in this kind of story, she is very mischievous and childlike. And while she seems to have fun just sort of milling around on Earth, she also desperately wants to get back to her own family and planet, and as such, Shaun puts it upon himself to take her back to where his spaceship landed and to get her home. Meanwhile, the farmer, who I've now just only realised bears a bit of a resemblance to Greg Davies.
Never in the history of the whole show have I felt contempt for all of them.
Notices the hysteria and the UFO obsession going on amongst the town people, and since the alien has also just wrecked his combine harvester, decides to take advantage of this and set up his own quote-unquote theme park in order to raise money to buy himself a new one. However, it seems that the alien's presence has not gone unnoticed, as a rather inept government organisation led by the determined Agent Red and assisted by a robot buddy are hell-bent on tracking down the alien. So as you can imagine with this sort of synopsis, it's basically your typical ET/Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of story. In fact, Close Encounters of the Herd Kind might have actually been a better subtitle, but of course we all know something that already used that. So it's not the most original story, which is a shame in comparison to the last one, which actually did have a very unpredictable story. But let's be frank here, Shaun the Sheep was never really about the story. Primarily what it's about is having good comedic setups and really good animation, particularly considering that Shaun the Sheep has always been an advocate of the classic silent cinema form of pantomime. Which this film still does in great effect. Possibly even better so than the last one was, but of course it doesn't really matter about all of that. What does matter is if the movie is funny, and I'm delighted to say, yes, it's very funny. I was admittedly rather anxious about the idea of this movie because I felt it was a movie that didn't really need to exist. The first Shaun the Sheep movie was a really good movie, and like I said, had a surprisingly unpredictable plot, some very good comedy, and probably out of all of Aardman's movies was the one that best represented that sort of small town British charm. So it did sort of feel like this was an unnecessary sequel and they were just making it to try and cash in on the fact that Shaun the Sheep is still very popular. However, I will admit that as a movie, it's really, really funny. In fact, I'd actually argue that in terms of jokes, it's actually better than the first movie was. The first movie definitely felt more like it was trying to get to you on an emotional level rather than a comedic level, and I do respect it for that, but I do much prefer Shaun the Sheep for its jokes rather than the emotional elements it brings, and this one I definitely feel had a better series of jokes and also had a lot more interesting setups for jokes. The whole alien fish out of water sort of idea of a character we've seen to death before, but this one actually does work quite well, and actually the lack of dialogue really does work to its benefit in that regard, since it means we don't get as much in terms of dialogue and it's all about the actions and reactions, facial expressions and body language. Plus the alien definitely does have a sense of personality about her. She's curious, rather headstrong, and doesn't really think about what she does before she does them, which actually makes her an interesting pairing with Shaun, because often that's the personality he has in the group. Granted, Shaun does sometimes take the role of the responsible one within the group when the other sheep get out of hand, but he's often the first one to cause trouble in the first place, so having him paired with someone who gives him a run for his money is actually quite an interesting dynamic and leads to some good jokes. Also, it's interesting to see Aardman go into a more sci-fi route with this movie, since it's not something they've done all that often. The first that comes to mind in that regard is of course A Grand Day Out, which they straight up reference within the first 5 minutes, which in itself is kind of weird because Shaun the Sheep is supposed to take place within the same canon as the Wallace and Gromit universe, but it is a nice little reference and it's the first of many callbacks in this movie. It's also cool seeing the various references they pull out, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Trek and Doctor Who. Seriously, the amount of Doctor Who references in this are off the chain, but they're all pretty funny. It is a shame that the other sheep and even the farmer don't get as much of the focus this time around like they did in the last movie, but we already did have a movie that focused on them and several series of a TV show, so it is nice to have some more focus on some newer characters, plus the actual main characters, Shaun and Blitzer, do still have quite a bit of screen time and are still the main focus, so that's always good. Speaking of the new characters, the main villain, Agent Red, is actually quite a decent villain. She's definitely got that Mrs. Tweedy vibe of being a very intimidating character, but she's not quite as memorable or interesting. although this time she's meant to be a little bit more sympathetic, so I suppose that's the reason why, but still, I think they could have done more with her. However, the character of the villain side that definitely brings more to the table is her robot buddy, Muggins, who, as I hinted at earlier, definitely has some strong resemblance to the robot from A Grand Day Out, especially with him having a filing cabinet within his chest area. I think it was a nice little callback. Admittedly, he's nowhere near as creepy as that robot was, though to be fair, that's probably all for the better. It does share some of the same flaws that the first movie had. While it is actually a very entertaining movie, it does start off rather slow and is a bit difficult to get into within the first half an hour. But if you stick with it, by the end you are completely sucked in. But for some kids that might be a bit of a difficult thing to do, so admittedly in terms of being a children's movie, it does fall down a little bit. But children do have more of a sense of attention than we give them credit for sometimes, so I do feel that they'll be able to stick around for when it gets really good. As I said before, this movie is definitely a lot funnier than the first one. Not to say the first one didn't have some good jokes in it, but with the fact that it was within the first 5 minutes we get a character who sees an alien spaceship, gets scared away by it, but is too obsessed with his chips that he can't bear to leave them behind. That is a very funny joke, and is also incredibly British. The only way it could be more British than that is if it was a curry. And yes, I know curries are from India, but I think we actually eat more of them in the UK than they do. We do still get some good heartfelt moments, and it's made all the better when Aardman's animation is just as good as it always is. In fact, it's almost more impressive here when you consider they're able to make the characters emote so well and show you exactly what they're feeling, despite being very simply designed and having no dialogue whatsoever. Admittedly, resorting to the corny pop song at the third act breakdown I think was going a bit too far.
What's it like to wonder why I do everything with you on my mind?
But in spite of that, it actually is a really good heartfelt moment. Overall, the movie does feel like it's trying to be more funny than the first movie was, which was definitely trying to be more of an emotional movie, and I think in that respect, it was actually the best way to go, since there was probably no way they could top the emotional elements of the first movie, so probably best to go for a more funny angle with this one. I'm glad the movie actually turned out not to be a waste of time, and while there isn't really any kind of building of character and story from the first movie, Shaun the Sheep isn't really the kind of franchise where there's any kind of serialization or even a massive amount of sense of continuity. I mean, let's not forget, at this point in time in the TV show, Blitzer had a beard, and there's also meant to be a cat character, and they're nowhere to be found in this movie. So they definitely have more of that Looney Tunes kind of story element to it, where each individual episode, or in this case movie, is its own isolated event that happens to these particular characters. And as an isolated event for these characters, I'd say it's pretty good. Now granted, Aardman's next upcoming movie is set to be another sequel, and that's one I'm actually even more cautious about, because at least Shaun the Sheep is a franchise that shows that it can still keep on going even after all this time. Chicken Run, on the other hand, was a movie that had a complete story and a perfect beginning, middle and end, so I don't really know how you can expand on that. But I guess only time will tell what will happen with that. But now, let's move on to the next part of Aardmay. So, Aardman decided to venture into a new Christmas special that wasn't Wallace and Gromit, and is actually about Christmas, with a standalone called Robin Robin. But, does it work on its own, or does it just make us wish we had the cheese duo back? A stray Robin chick is found by a family of mice and taken in by them and raised as one of their own. But, given that she's not a mouse, that means she has trouble with sneaking around for food and avoiding trouble. But, her family still loves her, but they still need to eat, so she tries one last time on Christmas Eve to get some food. But on her way, she comes across a magpie who tells her about the shiny wishing star at the top of the spiky tree, and tells her that if they get that, they'll have whatever they wish for. So this short is very simple in terms of its plot and layout. It's a very typical old school style Christmas special, but I like that. I love those humble little Christmas specials, and this really reminds me of something I would have seen on TV as a kid myself. It was very nostalgic to me in that regard. It really does have the feel of a British Christmas. despite snow being everywhere. When was the last time we had a white Christmas in this country? Especially when they're in the house. It reminds me a lot of the house scenes from The Snowman or the Kevin the Carrot Aldi ads. I always love a Christmas special that really captures the mood of the season. The voice acting's pretty good too. The Robin and her family do basically what is needed for their roles.
You can't sneak a whole sandwich.
How do you sneak a sandwich?
Like this.
I love Richard E. Grant's Magpie character. He reminds me a lot of Jeremy from The Secret of Nim, but with the voice of a slightly less femmy C-3PO. It's great.
Let's get you safe indoors, eh?
Thanks. Is the cat still...
Poor little thing.
And Gillian Anderson's cat, as in the cat she voices, not the cat she owns, just sounds so deliciously evil.
It's the little bird who sneaks about on the floor like a mouse.
And this is certainly a better fit for her than the last time she voiced a villain in a stop-motion franchise. But the biggest thing to talk about with this special is its style and its look. It's really interesting to see Aardman not only using a new art and craft style with more felt-based models, which reminds me a lot of those Wes Anderson stop-motion films, or My Life as Courgette,
but to also have something a lot more nature and atmosphere-based.
Now, of course, Aardman has ventured into things that indulge the beauty of nature before with Shaun the Sheep, and atmosphere with Chicken Run, and even some of the early Wallace and Gromit shorts, but never to this degree. They tend to stick more to artificial and man-made themes and environments, so this is really a new thing for them. It reminds me a lot of Bambi, truth be told. The animation is very different too. Aardman tends to have very smooth frame rates and all feels very laminar and consistent. Here it's a lot more choppy, but in a purposeful way, like the Spider-Verse movies, and it works really well. It gives it an old school feel, like a British stop-motion show from the 80s, and it works really well for the quiet and atmospheric tone. It also reminds me a lot of the animated specials based on the work of Julia Donaldson and Alex Scheffler. And while those were mostly done with CGI, they did look as if they were trying to emulate stop motion in their style, and the colour and lighting is definitely similar here. Even the designs of the models don't look like Aardman. Usually with almost all Aardman productions, they follow the style of either Nick Park or Peter Lord, each of whom styles are very distinctive. But here, no, it's a much more simple style that kind of looks like a stop motion version of the CalArt style, which is ironic since Aardman was an influence for the CalArt style, but that's just how it is. It feels so different from other Aardman productions in every aspect, since it's a musical, which is extremely rare for Aardman. I think this is the first time they've done a musical, and they're not bad songs. They're nothing special, but they're cute.
Crumbs and crust and stale bread, soggy flakes and bin tracks.
Although the one song that the Magpie sings is a complete rip-off of See My Vest from The Simpsons.
This chair, hedgehog hair, pamper clips, I've got the pair. Grizzly bear underwear, turtles' necks, I've got my share.
Which is again ironic since Matt Groening's style was also heavily influenced by Aardman. Though the Cat's villain song is really good and almost sounds weirdly sexy. Even if Gillian's not the best singer, she does do a good job here.
You could be sitting snug perfectly. You don't fit in, but you'd fit into my belly.
Although cute is definitely a word that exemplifies this special, it is very cute. Which is also something that Aardman doesn't directly go for. They certainly have their cute elements and they always are super charming, but they don't always go for the aww moments. But here they do, and they don't feel cheap or pandering at all. It fits with the tone and story. Though it is funny that it's so cute given that real world robins are vicious bastards. Seriously, there's a reason you only ever see robins on their own. They fight other robins to the death if another one enters their territory. You ever wonder why their breasts are red? Now that would have turned this special from a cute little Christmas show into another Watership Down. Not that I'd object to that. Regardless, while the story and characters are rather typical for the genre, the look of it is what really sells it, and it really exemplifies Aardman's skill with taking simple things but making them special through things like the look and the charm of it, and it's really great. I wouldn't put this up there as one of my favourite Christmas specials like a Mickey's Christmas Carol or even Bottom's Holy episode, but it is really cute, and I think I will put it on again this Christmas. But join us next time when Aardman ventures into a franchise in a galaxy far, far away. So we get into Aardman's most recent attempt at children's programming, which I stupidly forgot to mention last year, though given it's not exactly been the most successful, you could say that that's fitting. Lloyd of the Flies. The show sadly only lasted one season, though that was more down to the channel it was being shown on going under only a year later. Not the smartest move from Aardman, but hey, could have been worse. Also, since this show didn't do so well, it means the info on it is shockingly sparse. It's not even got a Wikipedia page, so I admit I'm not sure about a lot of the production of this show, and that includes the animation, which I legit can't tell if it's CGI or genuine stop motion. Given that Aardman was suffering from a plasticine shortage at the time, it likely is CGI, but with the low frame rate, I'm really not sure, but I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments once this video is out. Regardless of its obscurity, this is actually a really good kids show. Great voice acting, animation, and writing all round. The series is about the titular Lloyd, a housefly who lives in a rotten apple core of a house with his family and interacts with all sorts of other bugs in a household kitchen, having little mini adventures and just being a kid. We've seen these sorts of setups before with bug cartoons and movies, but granted not all that recently. This isn't just ants or a bug's life again, it takes the bug society premise, but instead of it being a social commentary, it makes it more of a slice of life setup, which I think was a clever idea and something we've not really seen before from this premise. The writing is just really wholesome and has legit good laughs and is perfect for literally all ages. Anyone could watch this to the point where it really reminded me of Bluey, just slightly less cute and more British. And I do love kids shows that are like this now, that are aimed for a more younger audience but don't patronise them and give their parents something to enjoy too. It really does give me hope for a new generation. Unlike Bluey though, the show really uses its setup and environment to have a lot of creative and silly ideas that are a lot of fun. Tom Rosenthal does a great job as Lloyd himself.
I do, yes, absolutely. Yes, I am. It was very impressive.
But I will admit that his best friend Abacus, great name by the way, his voice is rather subdued and sounds rather like his voice actor Alex Lawther isn't really putting a lot of effort into it.
Abacus, what's on my head?
Before I tell you, I think it's a baby one, so try not to panic.
You do get used to it, but I feel it might have been better to get somebody else for this role. Most of the rest of the cast is made of up-and-comers, so no one too noteworthy to mention, besides Malcolm, who is voiced by Rob Rackshaw, who, if you've watched a lot of British kids TV, you'll recognise him.
Wait till you see it. The entire house is an absolute tip. An insect paradise.
Schnell, schnell, chop, chop, andale, andale.
The series even spawned a sort of spin-off with The Adventures of Arachnofly on the YouTube channel, basically a Spider-Man spoof. They're basic Flash animation shorts, but they were very charming and funny, and made more so by how the voices are provided by Lloyd in-universe.
Oh, don't get too comfortable. I will escape. I always do.
As far as I could tell, the show doesn't get as heavy as Bluey sometimes does, but that's just the tone it's going for, and it's not too devoid of life lessons and more emotional elements. It just mostly keeps things light-hearted and fun, which is what Aardman does best. Also, I do really love the intro. For something that's so basic, it's really cute and memorable. Although for me, that's because when Lloyd says, "I'm a fly,"
This is about me, Lloyd. I'm a fly.
I can't help but be reminded of this. Regardless, this is a really sweet and well-made kids show, and it's a shame that it didn't really get much of a chance to shine due to jumping onto a sinking ship. But still, what we got was really good, and I hope we get to see it return at some point in the future. But next we'll be looking at another Aardman collaboration with Kids TV, but this time it's going to be for something that was doing a lot better than CITV did at the time, and we'll look at that in the next video. So, Aardman teaming up with Star Wars. I honestly never thought I'd see the day. It just seems like two things that would never join together. But they did here. This is an episode of the Star Wars anthology series Star Wars Visions, so it's a self-contained standalone story that doesn't tie into anything directly to any of the other major stories. But as a little world-building short with the style of animation that the franchise hasn't ventured into before, it's pretty good. As far as the plot goes, it's more or less just your typical underdog versus uptype snob race story. It's basically the plot of Cool Runnings but with Star Wars. But that's no bad thing, and despite the lack of story originality, It's pretty charming and a cute short. To discuss in more detail, basically a young girl on Tatooine, because of course it's Tatooine, it's always that planet in Star Wars, why give Hoth or Endor some more love, is hoping to compete in a mother-daughter freighter race, but there's just one problem. Her mother is a junk and scrap hauler, so her ship isn't as glamorous as the big champ's one, but perhaps with some teamwork they might just be able to beat them. It is so surreal seeing the Star Wars iconography in the Aardman style. It'd be like seeing a Mortal Kombat game done in the style of the Teletubbies, though I would not be against seeing that. But while Aardman has ventured into sci-fi a few times, they've never gone this far with it, so it's weird seeing these humble British plasticine puppets in a world that is possibly the biggest sci-fi film franchise that has ever existed. Although, it's also fitting that a lot of the cast are British because, well, most of the cast in Star Wars films are British, and it's often filmed in Britain too. Although, granted, they don't go in for as many regional accents as this special does.
What's up with Z1?
Nothing now. All fixed.
This just makes me wonder where in the Star Wars universe the Yorkshirean Twi'leks come from. Then again, given how Bib Fortuna ends up looking in the Boba Fett spin-off, I could believe he's from the north.
My ass!
However, this is more than just a Star Wars story by Aardman. The Aardman charm is everywhere in this special, from the mum's astromech being like a dog, the welding mask looking like the Mandalorian's faceplate, the cameo from the 50s cooker robot from A Grand Day Out in the background, or hell, everything they do with the Wookiees is just so Aardman. And of course, Aardman give us their trademark background gags like they always do, and this is probably the perfect place to use stuff like that given how busy Star Wars environments are, so there's plenty of nooks and crannies to put gags into. Beyond that, there's not too much to talk about beyond the mind-buggering of the fact that Aardman and Star Wars have joined forces. Not to say that the special is bad, it's not. It's incredibly charming and sweet, but nothing that we've seen before. It's more or less just the novelty of it being Star Wars that helps it stand out. But this does use the Star Wars setting and theming to great advantage, and like I said, that Aardman sense of humour works surprisingly well in it. The animation is nothing too special compared to what we've seen before. Truth be told, it reminds me a lot of the Pirates movie, and that had some of the best animation Aardman's ever had, so it was a good start to go with for this movie. However, it certainly does give you a sense of momentum during the race scene, and it reminds me a lot of the train chase in The Wrong Trousers, especially the way with the mum dangles off the back of the ship at the end reminds me of Wallace getting stuck on the back of the train in that special. Though this time it makes sense that the area they're racing in is so damn long as opposed to Wallace's house seemingly being 15 miles wide. But it does lead to a very fun race sequence and is nowhere near as long and tedious as the last time Star Wars decided to do a race scene. Overall, it's nothing too significant to either franchise as it represents, but the fact that it's even a thing is cool and a great way to show that Star Wars can have more charm to it beyond what it already is, and can experiment when it wants to and have it work. Unfortunately, not all experiments work, and the next time we'll be looking at a rather failed experiment from Aardman that I previously had no idea was even a thing, and frankly I was better off not knowing about it. But we'll just have to dive right in and chop the chicken on that one. Chicken Run 2. I've made it no secret that I've been skeptical of this project since day one. Hell, it got announced all the way back when I did the first Aardmay in 2018. My god, has it really been that long? So I wasn't necessarily looking forward to this, but even with that doubt, I still went in with an open mind and tried to see how it was. And to be honest, I actually really loved it. No buts about it, this is a really fun movie. It's not as good as the first one, but it's clear it's trying to be a different movie, and I appreciate that and I think it was the right way to go. And it clearly paid off with a really fun, colourful and creative movie that feels like a worthy follow-up to the previous film. The film picks up more or less right after where the last one did, with Ginger, Rocky and the rest of the hens living on their bird sanctuary island, and the pair of them are excited to meet their new chick, Molly, played by Bella Ramsey, who definitely has her mum's tenacity and drive and her dad's urge to be free and have adventures, but of course, Ginger is scared of the world outside the island and tries to make sure Molly never goes out there. But she just can't help herself and manages to get to the mainland and runs into the Scouser hen called Frizzle, no relation, played by Josie Sedgwick Davies, who are both then taken to supposedly Chicken Paradise. But this place, for as nice as it seems, appears to have a dark side to it, and is lorded over by someone perhaps from her parents' past. First thing to mention about this movie is that it's definitely not aiming for the heavy drama and dark tone that the first movie had. This one is bright, upbeat, and focuses more on its jokes than its conflict. But as I said, I think that was a good way to go, since it helps differentiate it from the first movie, and they don't do it in a cheap way either. They have good jokes and still have time to let the characters be themselves and have their moments, but without getting too heavy. Basically, this is the Gremlins 2 to the first movie's Gremlins, and I like Gremlins 2, so that works out perfectly. Though this movie does have more depth and nuance to it than Gremlins 2, the conflict with Ginger's motherly instincts and Molly's urge to be free is a good conflict, and while it does remind me a little too much of Little Mermaid 2, it's nowhere near as bad as that. And most of the movie's plot is very good, especially since while the first movie felt like a war prison movie, this one feels more like a heist movie, which was a brilliant idea to switch it up. The hens breaking into the new high-tech chicken farm is really cool and allows Aardman to use their natural creativity with using household objects in a funny and clever way, which is something they've always excelled at. Plus, the design of the chicken farm just looks awesome, like this sci-fi imperial warship with an outside design that looks like Tracy Island. It's great. It also allows them to use a bit more of their trademark background jokes, which were sorely lacking in the first movie, which are always some of my favourite bits of an Aardman production. The animation evolution since the first movie is really clear too. The colours are just so much more vibrant, and even the characters seem a lot more expressive now, and while some of them do look a little too cartoony, they really utilise the amount of expression they can get out of them. Plus, the integration with more digital effects is pretty seamless, much better than Early Man, which was pretty obvious how much the backgrounds were CG in that movie. Though, I guess it'll be more excusable for them using more CGI in the future since they've apparently run out of plasticine, which is like Pixar running out of computers or Disney running out of lawyers, but hey, these things happen. So is there anything I don't like about this movie? Well, yes, there is. One of the big controversial elements of this movie was in how the old voice actors had been replaced. And to be fair, with some it makes sense. With Fowler, since his original voice actor is dead, and Rocky, whose original voice actor is a lunatic, but a lot of the ones they did replace don't make any sense. The only original voice actors who stayed are Imelda Staunton, Jane Horrocks, Lynn Ferguson, and Miranda Richardson.
I made her a bicycle.
Oh, that's not a plan. That's just saying what you wish would happen.
Aye, and 12 herrings in a bagpipe are just a pile of mince if you haven't kent the rules.
Who, I think we can agree that they were the best cast members of the original, so I'm glad they're still here, and they still do a fantastic job. But Ginger's voice actress, Julia Swahala, was replaced by Thandie Newton, who, granted, is a great actress and does a decent job.
Look, I know it looks like a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, but we know the layout, and Mac thinks there's a way in.
But it does seem odd to replace her with Thandie, especially when she's not even British. Nick and Fetcher got replaced by Romesh Ranganathan and Daniel Mays respectively, and I do like both of them, Romesh especially, but again, why replace Timothy Spall and Phil Daniels? Both of them are awesome.
This makes you happy and brainless, apparently.
Yeah, I feel it. It's amazing.
Mate, I haven't turned it on yet.
Zachary Levi and David Bradley as the replacements for Rocky and Fowler were perfect though. In fact, I think I like Levi's performance better than Mel Gibson since, well, now it sounds like he has genuine emotion and sincerity in his voice.
And actually, it's a pretty good story.
Plus, having him dance the closing theme of Bottom doesn't hurt. And Bradley, well, it's David Bradley, of course he's going to be good.
Just as Whiz-Bang Charlie thought we were back in places, enemy fire at 6 o'clock.
Apparently a lot of these replacements were the fault of Netflix, who demanded more diverse and Hollywood-recognisable actors for market appeal, which just seems like a really stupid idea to me. I mean, it's bloody Chicken Run 2, a sequel to one of the most popular kids' movies of all time. Why do you need to make it more appealing? Again, the replacements do fine, it's just those who could come back I would have liked to have seen come back, especially Spall. He's one of my favourite actors, and to see him get snubbed, that really sucks. Also, the character of Frizzle does seem kind of pointless in the overall story. She really has no function other than just moving the plot forward, so I feel like they didn't really need her. The only other minor issue I have is with, and this is where we're getting into spoilers, so be prepared here, Mrs. Tweedy, who, yes, is somehow back after getting crushed under a massive barn door, but I guess considering what happens to her in this movie, she's pretty much indestructible. Now, Miranda Richardson does do a great job like she did last time, but her character is nowhere near as terrifying as she was previously. I think part of that comes from how she's surprisingly not expressive in her model as she was last time, which given the upgrade from the last movie's technology is a real surprise, but Miranda does also seem to be doing a much more laid-back performance this time, and there's no moments where she gets as pants-crappingly terrifying as this.
Yeah, the chickens.
Which ones?
All of them.
But she is still a great baddie, and it is awesome to see her go through more emotions than she did the last time and have a genuine grudge against Ginger, which is impressive that she recognises her, but yeah, to see her go full evil genius is great. Also, the new villains, Dr. Fry and Reginald Smith, are good too, the latter especially because, well, it's Peter Serafinowicz, he's always awesome. But besides those minor issues, this is a really fun and entertaining movie that doesn't try too hard to overcome the milestone that was the previous movie, and it paid off for them. I really highly recommend this one. But next time we'll be taking a look into another bird-themed production by Aardman. First off, we've got a pair that, surprisingly, I've not talked about for a while in Ardmay. The pair that launched the rocket of Aardman into popular culture, Wallace and Gromit. Wallace and Gromit are like the Heinz baked beans of the UK culture world. You never notice them, but they're always there, and you're always happy when they show up. I know I've been doing this for too long when I compare a plasticine dog to a tin of baked beans. But they have always been around in the background, still doing ads and BBC idents, but they made a big return last Christmas with a brand new TV movie, which also features the return of some familiar faces from the franchise, as well as some new ones, not all of whom are friendly. In a break from tradition, the movie's plot does not revolve around a new profession for the boys, but instead goes back to more or less the same setup from The Wrong Trousers, quite fittingly, with Wallace giving Gromit a present, a robot gardening gnome called Norbot, to do gardening for him. Like many of Wallace's well-meaning but overbearing gifts, Gromit's not too keen on it, but the neighbourhood sure is, and soon Wallace is hiring out Norbot for all sorts of jobs, and making the baldy one a town hero. Which naturally annoys a certain pilfering penguin from the duo's past. Feathers McGraw is still doing porridge since we last saw him, but seeing Wallace and Norbot on the TV gives him an idea for both escape and revenge. While this movie doesn't feel quite as theatrical as the previous one, I'd argue that this is the superior one overall. Were Rabbit was a fun movie, but clearly suffered from lacking a good villain, an uneven script, and behind-the-scenes tampering. This movie feels like a labour of love through and through. Everything about it feels like Nick Park was intending to make something that exemplified everything that is great about Wallace and Gromit. The charm, the creativity, the Britishness, the occasional moments of darkness, and the great interaction with our main characters. This is hands down a fantastic entry into the franchise, and honestly, wouldn't be bad as the final hurrah for the duo. I doubt it will be, but if they never make any more Wallace and Gromit after this, I'd be satisfied. What helps is Wallace's new official voice. Ben Whitehead has been doing occasional stand-ins for Peter Sallis for years, but now Sallis is no longer with us, it was time for him to step up to the stump and knock it to 6. And yes, that was a cricket reference. This is set in Yorkshire after all. I wouldn't say he's as good as Ratty himself was in voicing Wallace, but those are some big shoes to fill. But for the most part, you can't really tell the difference. He sounds just like him.
After all, necessity is the mother-in-law of invention.
There are a few times when you can still tell it's not Sallis, like when he has to scream or go a bit more high-pitched.
This is a nightmare, Gromit. The police want to throw me in jail, the neighbours all hate me, and the press think I'm evil.
But otherwise, as a successor to the original, I think he was a perfect choice. I know I was a bit negative about him in the past, but I think that was more in how I felt sad about Sallis no longer being with us. But Whitehead has really grown into the role and does a fantastic job. Gromit's still the great silent partner he always is, of course, and while this movie doesn't get quite as heavy as the first one did, no Wallace breaking down in tears or anything like that, it does get very sentimental with their relationship, which I think was really sweet. And of course, Feathers is still the dark, twisted poultry that he always was, and again shows a huge amount of emotion despite having a completely unmoving face, and it's all done through his body language, and that is super impressive. Plus the fact that his face doesn't move does lead to some really funny bits of deadpan visual humour. PC Mac, which for the record I just got the joke with his name after all these years, also returns again and is also voiced by Peter Kay as he was previously. And I admit I'm not really a fan of Kay, but he does do a good job with the voice, and I'm glad they gave his character more to do in this one, because he is very entertaining and does have some great lines.
That's a flippin' turnip!
As for the new characters, Norbot is a nice addition to the world, and despite not really having a personality, is a lot of fun and has a lot of character, helped by his also unmoving face, which makes him a good pair with Feathers, almost like a really surreal version of the comedy and tragedy symbol, and is surprisingly creepy at certain times. All of this is helped by his voice provided by the great Rhys Shearsmith, who has had a lot of experience with both entertaining and creeping people out for almost 40 years.
Pointlessly blowing leaves around! Norbot, recharge time! Happy nifty Norbots, we love to do our job. When we come round and fix your house, we make up quite a mob.
And the trainee policewoman, Mukherjee, I admit when I first saw her I was worried about how she might have been a superfluous character like Frizzle in Chicken Run 2, or that she would be focused on too much for the sake of introducing a new character, but she was fantastic. She's really funny, charming, and provides a good contrast to Mac as the more level-headed and logical one, and she's given just the right amount of focus while not taking too much attention away from why we're here, that being Wallace, Gromit and Feathers, so bravo on how they did her. The animation is as fantastic as always, and while they did use a little CGI in there, mostly for the backgrounds, it's integrated very well and isn't distracting in any way, unlike Early Man, and does help make the more grander moments feel more epic. And of course, with anything Wallace and Gromit, we get a great chase scene at the end. It's not one of the best in the franchise, but it is a lot of fun, and gives us something unique with it being in the water, giving us something new and creative that we hadn't seen before from the duo. My only real complaint is that it does feel like it doesn't really up the ante and gives us something we've not seen before from this franchise like the last movie did. But since Wallace and Gromit have been around for so long, it's hard to do something new because they've already done it all, and to be honest, it's just really nice to see them, regardless of if they're rocking our world or not. They're just like the reliable friend of the animation world. They're not unpredictable, but they're always nice to have around. Overall, this is a brilliant entry into the franchise, and I highly recommend it for any fans of Wallace and Gromit, or any fans of stop motion in general. It does feel like after a rough patch, Aardman is back to their former luster, and I'm hoping that this brings a new age of greatness from them. But they've still been making good stuff, even if you've not noticed it's there, and we'll be getting into an example of that next time. So we've got a small one today, but a sweet one none the same. Aardman's contribution to Cartoon Network's Over the Garden Wall. I've never watched the show that this short originates from. I'm a bit past checking out new cartoons these days, unless it's for a video, and since this is just about Aardman, I just want to focus on this short. But from what little I've seen, it looks like a nice, sweet little show, but we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss the short made by Aardman that ties into the show. It's always really surreal to hear American voices come out of Aardman animation puppets.
Greg, can you just cut down on some of the nonsense?
Though, granted, the stop-motion style of this short is a very different kind of thing from Aardman's traditional fare. It sort of looks like the animation from old stop-motion shows like Bagpuss or The Clangers, but updated to look more modern. It's really interesting and fascinating to see this style in the modern day, especially with much higher frame rates than those shows and much more detailed puppets. The animation on the painted faces is really good. They have a really good cadre of expressions, and it syncs up really well with the dialogue, though I think these were done with digital animation techniques, so not exactly as impressive, but it still looks great. And one thing I really like about this short is how it really immerses you in nature, very much like what Robin did, but even then that was more so suburban garden nature. This is more pure nature, and like the last time, it's really interesting to see Aardman do this sort of atmosphere, where they usually stick to more down-to-earth domestic stuff or really wacky and surreal environments, and for such a quick short, it really draws you into the moody and magical feel of this woodland world. I love it. It really reminds me a lot of Wind of the Willows, especially the 80s Cosgrove Hall version, which fittingly Wallace's voice actor was also in.
Villainous weasels. I'll learn them.
Granted, how much of that is due to Aardman or the writers of the original show is something I can't tell, but Aardman always put their best into everything, even if they're just goons for hire on someone else's passion project, and I always love them for that. The fact that the puppets look like they're actually hand-carved from wood is a really charming touch, like how you can see the fingerprint marks on the plasticine puppets in their more traditional stuff. The fact that these actually look like they were carved with a knife out of a block of wood is a really charming feature. Although, like with the fingerprint thing, these were probably done with more modern techniques, so they were likely 3D printed. But still, it's a really nice touch to make it look more natural. The final shot with all of them on the mini stage is super cute too. Reminds me a lot of some of the local theatre productions I've helped on in the past. The lighting is also gorgeous, a lot more ambitious than Aardman normally goes for, and it looks amazing. It really gives you that warm, comforting feeling. You may have noticed I've not really talked much about the plot, and that's because there's not really much to talk about in that regard, but that's because it's not about the plot, it's about the atmosphere and the experience of the show, and I really like that. Though, as I said before, my lack of connection of the series that it comes from means I can't really appreciate as much what's going on, but as a complete outsider, it's still a lot of fun. Overall, from the outside looking in, it's a fun little short. Like I said, I have zero connection with the source material. It's really sweet and nice to see Aardman experimenting with new technologies and styles, but they've been doing that and working for hire for others for as far back as when the company first started, and we'll be looking at some of the examples of those next time.
And we're back once again with another look at Britain's most popular and successful animation studio. But what to do this time? I've done most of the movies and I've done most of the TV shows, so what's the next logical move? I'll tell you what. Adverts. In terms of TV commercials, Aardman have had a greater hand in such than probably their movies and TV shows catalogue combined, so it's probably about time that we paid respects to some of these great cornerstones of capitalism that Aardman have brought us so brilliantly. So for this year's Aardmay, we're taking a look at some of Aardman's adverts. Now, like previous Aardmays, we won't be looking at all of them because there's literally hundreds of them, but we will be taking a look at some of their most famous ads and some of my personal favourites, plus a little extra treat for the hell of it. So, without further ado, this is Aardmay 2020. Oh, and to address what the majority of the comment section will be asking me, I'm not reviewing Shaun the Sheep 2 because I haven't seen it yet and I couldn't get my hands on a DVD to review it, so sorry about that. I'll probably get to it eventually, but not today. Also, some people suggested I look at Aardman video games, which is an interesting idea, but I have no way of filming video game footage, so that's out as well. But if you are curious, I Don't Have a Nose has reviewed a few Aardman games in the past and done a really good job of them, so I'd go check out his videos if you want to. But with that out of the way, let's get into our first ad, which is probably the most well-known of all the Aardman ads. Of course, we're going to start with the Lurpak butter ads, which involve this guy, the Lurpak man, renowned for his old-fashioned crooning singing voice and his mad trombone skills, who is apparently named Douglas.
I said sophisticated. You'll get it back after the commercial, Douglas.
These ads started in around 1986, making them some of the first Aardman ads ever managed, and were certainly a good example of their skills. And it was probably a good change of pace for them to make content that was only 30 seconds long per video. In stop motion terms, that's probably only a week's worth of sleepless nights. Most of these early ads had the same gag. Douglas would appear, sing a song about how good Lurpak butter is whilst venturing around the breakfast table, spreading himself out onto things that you would normally put butter on, which sounds far grosser than I think now that I say it out loud. These ads were nothing spectacular, but they were fun, creative, and the music was quite enjoyable. But eventually, much like the Go Compare ads, they went for a more self-aware ad campaign in the 2000s, in where Douglas would be harassed by the narrator, who finds him annoying and distasteful, and constantly tries to prevent him from playing his instruments.
Listen, Butterman.
Douglas?
Douglas, we are trying to do a tasteful commercial for Lurpak cheese spread, not
butter.
These are quite funny, even though I think it's kind of unfair since the old ads were far from annoying, but I appreciate how they switched things up to prevent the formula from getting old, unlike a similar ad campaign from an Aardman employee. It is funny to watch these ads now in how they made Lurpak seem very delicate, creamy and sophisticated, whereas the Lurpak ads now trying to make it seem like the manly alternative to other butters. It seems almost like Lurpak got some identity issues, which would make sense with how it's so malleable. But we've got to move on to the next ad, but this was a good one to start off with. But moving on.
Lurpak, there's no substitute for taste.
From one of their oldest ads to their newest ads, the Wallace and Gromit DFS ads. While Wallace and Gromit have appeared in many ads over the years, including a really weird one for pudding in Japan, well, that was just bizarre. I didn't think sheep would enjoy gelatin-based pudding snacks. And of course they did some ads for Jacob's Crackers. I mean, that had to happen, didn't it? The ones made most recently are the ones I remember the most, mostly because it's the only time that Lady Tottington has appeared in the Wallace and Gromit franchise outside of Were-Rabbit, which is odd, but there is a reason for this. You see, beyond advertising the grand DFS sale, which is kind of redundant since DFS have had sales on since 30 minutes before the universe existed. This ad also serves as the 30th anniversary celebration of Wallace and Gromit, since it was released last year in 2019. This is kind of sad to think that the icons of both stop motion animation and British animation have had their milestone anniversary reduced to a sofa ad, but then again with Peter Salis no longer being with us, it would have been hard to do something more genuine with the characters. But replacing him with someone else and making an ad after his death just kind of feels like even more of an insult. This does bring up the question of who voices Wallace in these ads though, which it turns out to be Ben Whitehead, who has been the go-to voice for Wallace when Peter was unavailable, such as in other ads, some of the video games, and even did voices alongside Peter in other Wallace and Gromit projects. And to be fair, he doesn't do a bad job, but he's still nowhere near as good as Peter was.
Hold on a moment, your ladyship. You're gonna love this. It has a built-in foot massager.
I did talk about this with Blue Artisan recently, and he told me that there's a rumour going around that Ben's actually been the voice for Wallace in everything Wallace and Gromit related for years, and Aardman's never told us about it. Which, if that's true, then it would be a massive scandal if it ever came out. Call it Crackergate or something. But like I said, it's only rumours for now. In terms of voices, Helena Bonham Carter returns as Lady Tottington and does a great job like she did in Were-Rabbit.
Wonderful! How yummy!
But it is odd why they brought her back. Granted, she is an entertaining character, but I think most fans were more keen on seeing Gwendolyn come back. I mean, Anne Reid is still around and acting now, so it would have been some great fan service. But for what we got, it's fine. It just seems like an odd choice of what to do to celebrate these characters' big 30-year lifespan. But it is still nice to see Aardman acknowledge this anyway.
I told you this was the place to come, lad.
The Grand DFS Sale.
Ooh.
Next, we move on to something that's more unique for Aardman, a product made by them that's more American exclusive. That being the Serta mattress ads. These ads are, like many Aardman ads, a basic but very funny premise where people buy Serta mattresses and have such ease getting to sleep because of it they don't need to count sheep anymore. So the sheep, all of whom have numbers on them, get rather fed up about that and demand to be counted, which results in many funny outcomes.
Rufus!
Uh-oh.
Sheepdog.
Hey, next time someone tells us to leave, how about we leave?
What I find funny and great about these ads is how these ads actually have a better ability at integrating American accents into Aardman designs than Creature Comforts USA did, which is impressive for something that only lasts 30 seconds. But maybe that's just because the idea of bedtime sheep with a thick New York gangster accent is hilarious.
Traitor.
These are some of the funniest ads I've ever seen, a mix of great voice acting, animation, uniquely surreal but ingenious premise, and great punchlines which just make these ads a joy to watch. Though it is weird how everyone who buys a certain mattress in these ads never seems to put a mattress cover on them. Don't they get really itchy or sweaty during the night when sleeping on them? Although then again, there is one man who probably feels that way no matter what mattress he's sleeping on. And who might that be?
Come on, you and I are actually a lot alike.
We're both in the sleep business. We both work really hard.
Sure.
And we both wear wool suits.
Yes, that seriously just happened. And there is an explanation for it, but it's not a very good one. The most I can gather is that around 2012, Trump bought Serta and made it a part of his business empire, and insisted on being in the ads. And to be fair, these ads are still funny. It's just really awkward seeing that in them. Although Aardman isn't to be blamed for this, they were just outsourced by a company to make these ads, and they had no say in the matter. They just had to do what they were hired for. And now they probably have Trump on their list of people to say we're not into when they call on the phone. Right alongside Jeffrey Katzenberg.
You'll feel the difference the moment you lie down. Serta, we make the world's best mattress.
I think we need to get back to some more Britishness after we see that. And what's more British than a cup of tea? Ignoring how the leaves come from China or India. In terms of PG tips ads, the ones that people are probably more aware of are the ads involving the Removal Men Chimps or Johnny Vegas and Monkey, all of which were great ads, but Aardman have had their share of ads for a famous bag of rotting vegetation which you stick in a cup of boiling water as well. These ads are a series of episodes in a small, low-economy house inhabited by a Geordie blackbird, an Irish owl, and generically British accented pigeon, and the setups for the ads about how all the tough times these birds face in a rough house like this, but with a bag of PG tips, it makes it all seem better.
And how are you, Tom? I'm fine, thanks very much for asking. I think they need a bit of therapy. Stressful day, huh?
Stressed? What?
Tom, you're always so negative.
Maybe you should go on holiday. Chill out.
I'm not really a tea drinker. I know, a British person who doesn't drink tea, I'm an affront to nature. But I do like these ads, in how the hard times in life can be made better by just those little things that you enjoy. And these characters are a lot of fun, their voices are done superbly, and you really get a feel of what they're like even from the brief amount of time you see them. It genuinely surprises me that, much like the Meerkat ads, they didn't get their own spin-off show, because there's a lot of potential here, and Aardman are used to making shows that are only about 5 minutes length per episode, so it could have worked, but for what we got, we did get some great moments, and like many Aardman ads, they're really funny.
Couldn't fit into the dress then, madam. Dress? Oh, I couldn't fit into the changing room. Cow.
These ads were so popular that PG Tips even let Aardman make an ad for their 75th anniversary as a company. That's a huge ego-boosting moment when a little animation shed from Bristol gets to represent one of the oldest companies of the 20th century in an ad. I only hope I could get to do something of that level one day. Though knowing my luck, it'll probably be for the 3-year anniversary of TikTok or something, since nowadays that seems just as significant as a 75-year run. I need a cup of something.
Cheers, man.
And now we change the pace a bit from having a series of ads to having just a few ads that are much the same, but ones that have a killer soundtrack, with Cadbury's Crunchy Bar ads. Crunchy Bars, for those outside of the UK, are a Cadbury bar with a honeycomb centre. They're dry, a little rough on the palate, but very Moorish. But Cadbury have always had the hardest time finding an identity for these things in advertising, since they don't have as much personality in advertising terms as their other products. I mean, the regular Cadbury bars are very versatile in ads due to being the backbone of the company. The caramel bars have the oddly sexy bunny voiced by Aunt Sponge, and the cream eggs have that weird chicken rabbit. But Crunchy? How do you advertise this thing? Well, Aardman found a way.
I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it. I'm about to lose control, and I think I like it. Look what you do
That
to me.
Friday feeling. You just can't keep it in.
It's impossible not to want to dance to it, isn't it? Anything that uses the Pointer Sisters' I'm so excited immediately becomes awesome. Well, okay, except maybe this. These ads are so cool, which is impressive for them being so basic, especially the roller coaster one for how surprisingly epic it goes later on. And like I said, the use of the song choice just makes it so energizing and fun. Though in terms of an ad, it does kind of miss the point for me, since I certainly don't want to go out and buy one just from this ad. I want to go out and dance. Though to be fair, when I'm done, I'll probably want a Crunchy. Like I said, there were only a few of these ads made, or at least only a few that I can find, but there's still a ton of fun either way, although I don't think I'd want to eat a chocolate bar that a bunch of rabbits have been breeding in. Call me picky, but I don't find that very appealing.
That Friday feeling. You just can't keep it in.
And now onto another ad series that involves previous Aardman franchises, Creature Comforts, for the series of ads for Heat Electric. Yes, seriously, that's the name of the company. Took them a whole 5 seconds to come up with that one. To be honest, there's not really a lot to say about these ones. They're basically Creature Comforts, but with an ongoing theme of being for an electric company. And I like Creature Comforts, I think I made that clear in last year's Aardmay, but there's really nothing here worth talking about that's new. Everything I said about Creature Comforts last year can be applied to these ads. And that's not a bad thing at all, these ads are fine for that, and it's a good way of making the ads both entertaining and having testimonies from the real people about the product that you're selling, and some of the choices in the animals are kind of funny for the respective voices, like having the Scottish couple be pandas.
Before we got the dishwasher, this place was always a mess. There used to be dishes everywhere.
Yes, waiting for somebody to come and clear it away. But we never had a magic wand, but we got a dishwasher.
And of course, the kids have some great interjections in the interviews.
That's a good word, instantly. Yeah.
Instantly controllable.
It is, really.
And it goes bing when it's finished.
But there really isn't anything unique about these ads compared to the actual show. So if that is the case, why are you talking about them here, I hear you say? Well, there's a very simple answer for that, because I knew that if I didn't, everyone would complain that I didn't include them here. So there you are. Next ad, please.
For all your creature comforts, Heat Electric.
So from established characters from Aardman, we go to established characters from a cereal. These are the ads Aardman made for the classic Kellogg staple, Rice Krispies, and their iconic mascots, Snap, Crackle, and Pop. Of course, named after the noise that the cereal makes when you pour the milk in, though personally I always thought the noise sounded more like a tinkle sound. Though obviously you couldn't have a mascot called that now, could you? These ads were mostly a lot of what cereal ads in the late 90s were, justifying why they are actually healthy to eat at breakfast, since healthy food movements that went around about this time were really hammering down on just about every cereal except cornflakes.
They're 99%
fat-free! Ironically, much like it's invented it about people who masturbated in the 20s. But regardless, Rice Krispies had an easy time with this challenge, since while I admit I'm not a fan of the cereal, they are a really healthy cereal, especially compared to things like Frosties or Golden Nuggets, though I'd gladly eat a swimming pool of them before I even had a spoonful of Rice Krispies. But in any case, Aardman did a series of ads having Snap, Crackle and Pop explain the health benefits of the cereal while engaging in some playful slapstick.
Each one is made with a single grain of rice and have vitamin D, which helps build bones.
Each Kellogg's Rice Krispie is carbohydrate crammed.
To help keep you going through lunch.
And I have to say, the designs of these little elves really works in the Aardman animation style. I guess they really hit upon a lucky break with this one, since it's almost jarring how well these characters match with the claymation style, which is fantastic. Even the voices are spot on, with one exception. Snap and Pop's voices are perfect for what you'd imagine they sound like, but for whatever reason, Crackle is voiced by Brian Blessed.
Ready? Ever seen a yogurt fly? And have vitamin D, which helps build teeth and bones. Oh, fuck. Oh, bollocks.
Come, pilot. Sounds like a wanking machine.
Why would they pick him for this role? And don't get me wrong, I love Brian Blessed. He's one of my favourite people ever. But when you look at this cute, tiny little elf creature, would you really think, let's give him the voice of a man who could literally be heard from space and swears so much that even Jack Nicholson would blush in his presence? Every time I hear Crackle speak in these ads, it sounds like he's being possessed by some kind of demon. Well, despite that little anachronism, these ads were great for the cereal, and while Crackle's voice is a bit creepy in how it doesn't fit, he's still less scary than the Honey Monster.
Kellogg's Rice Krispies, much more than Snap,
Crackle.
And now another ad that has established Aardman characters in it, and almost feels like a response to another ad campaign, but we'll get to that in a minute. So of course, the biggest kids movie of 2000 was Aardman's own Chicken Run, since Disney's contribution to that year was Fantasia 2000, which was okay, and DreamWorks also brought us The Road to El Dorado, which was again okay, but neither were that big at the box office, especially compared to Chicken Run. Fantasia only barely made back its budget, and El Dorado didn't even break even. Disney also did release The Emperor's New Groove, which was a big hit, but still paled in comparison to how much money Chicken Run made, especially on its much smaller budget. So DreamWorks figured that Chicken Run was the more profitable movie that they released that year, and so decided to merchandise that instead, which of course included a big Burger King promotional campaign for the film, which naturally included toys, but it even included an Aardman animated TV ad, which has one of the funniest jokes I've ever seen in any ad. It's really not worth me explaining it, so just take a look. That is hilarious. It's so simple yet so effective. Much like Chicken Run itself, really. And funnily enough, it really ties in well with the plot of the movie, and the fact that Julia Swahala is the voice of Ginger, like in the movie, is all the more fitting. That being said, while this ad is great, it technically did steal this joke from another ad. This is going to go over the heads of most British viewers, but I'll explain as best as I can. You see, in the 90s, American fast food restaurant Chick-fil-A introduced an ad campaign which they still use to this day, a bunch of cows holding up signs that say, "Eat more chicken," to encourage people to eat at Chick-fil-A, which is quite funny, and it makes this ad even funnier because it's almost like the cast of Chicken Run are waging a war against Chick-fil-A cows. Though I'd be careful if I were you, Ginger. Those cows have superpowers. Yes, these are real. Still, even if this joke was stolen from something else, it's still a great gag, and it's good to see they didn't steal any of Chick-fil-A's homophobia at the same time. And now we move on to our last ad of the day, and the reason I picked this one is just how eerie a lot of this ad seems to have inspired a future Aardman movie. This is an ad for the human equivalent of hay bales, Weetabix, the breakfast food they advertise as making you strong. But in my experience, it'll actually make you anemic because it's so lacking in any sorts of vitamins or fats, you might as well just pour milk on some drywall. Regardless of that, all of these ads have been about how if you have your Weetabix in the morning, you'll be ready for anything, which is what this ad details, with a great little song about pirates to go along with it.
There was a ship all the other pirates feared, even Black, Blue, Red and Yellowbeard. Now the captain was as rotten as they come, and never once thought to write to his mum. There's a ship to the west! Shivery timbers walk the plank! SOS! Swim for shore! Pieces of eight! Abandoned ship! It wasn't magic or ghostly tricks! What was it? It was down to a bowl of Weetabix! Weetabix? That's why they found no pirates aboard the Mary Celeste.
For those who don't know, the Mary Celeste was an actual ship that was found mysteriously abandoned despite no signs of murder, fights, or even theft. Everything on the boat was still there and undisturbed, but there was no crew whatsoever. It's one of the famous sea ghost stories and a creepy natural phenomenon that has still gone unexplained. And according to this, it's because the crew saw that the nearby ship had eaten their Weetabix. To be fair, that's still a more plausible reason than the Kraken got them. What I like about this ad is how oddly similar the sense of humour is to the Pirates movie, which wouldn't be made for almost another 20 years after this ad. It's really quite funny watching this, thinking if this is where they got the idea to do a pirate-themed animated movie came from, which goes to show that commercials really are the greatest art form of the 20th century, where they can be the inspiration to entire films. I also like this ad because its style is very different to Aardman's traditional style, and it's always great to see Aardman branching out and trying new motifs with their animation. No, not like that. They seem to do this a lot in their adverts, such as with the Chewits ads, the Hovis ad series that they did, and the Chevron ads. It shows how versatile Aardman can be, which is good, and it's also kind of sad to think that Aardman are still able to be more creative and innovative with their ads alone than Disney has been in the last 5 years. Enough with these remakes and sequels. Give us something new and good, for crying out loud.
You're cruel, you are! Getting them all wet for nothing!
But we're not quite done yet today. I decided to look at something a little extra for a treat, that being the music video for the Peter Gabriel song, Sledgehammer. Now I know that this isn't an ad, but I'll never have another chance to talk about this again, so I might as well bundle it in here. For a little establishment, Peter Gabriel is a singer who was a former member of the band Genesis, but famously left in 1975 and was replaced by Phil Collins, as he wanted to pursue a solo career, which he struggled at for years until something came along that he thought could help him. MTV. When the music video generation got into full force by 1986, pretty much every band was making a music video to get themselves onto TV, some of which have become all-time classics, some of which that have not aged particularly well, but this certainly was a brand new art form that really defined the 80s, and Peter Gabriel certainly wasn't one to go against the flow, so he decided to make a music video for his song Sledgehammer. Thankfully, since this was well into the new wave movement, the song's lyrics were very evocative, but the meaning of the song was pretty much irrelevant, which was a perfect recipe for a music video.
Open up your fruitcake, you could have a fun car.
And Gabriel decided to enlist the help of Aardman to make his music video. And from there, history was made. In 1986, the music video for Sledgehammer had its debut on MTV and quickly made its way to #1. And while the song itself is great, the video is what we're here to talk about today. But do I really need to? Just look at this. This is some of the most creative, bizarre, and unbelievably intricate stop-motion animation I've ever seen, not the least of which in how you can see Gabriel was in the stop-motion portions of the video, meaning that he had to stand still for hours on end while I took pictures of him for the purpose of this video, which must have been absolute hell, but the man pulled it off. But that's just scratching the surface on how incredible this video is. All the little things, from the real things like toy trains, fruit and frozen chickens. At least I hope it was frozen. If it was raw under those lights, it would have started to smell pretty bad in that studio very quickly. The uber literal interpretation of the lyrics, the mix of claymation, real objects, still photography, stock footage, although that shot of the sperm at the beginning is a bit odd. This whole video is like a stop motion fan's dream and a stop motion animator's nightmare. This must have been ball-bustingly hard to make, and I really appreciate all the time and effort that went into making it. And it clearly paid off, since this is the most played video ever on MTV's history. Funnily enough, around the same time, Genesis released their song Land of Confusion, which had a similar video which used puppets and puppetry from Spitting Image, which is also a great video, but in my mind, it doesn't hold a candle to this. Mostly because Sledgehammer is less disturbing, although Land of Confusion is probably the better song of the two. I also love this video because Gabriel really gives it his all in the performance, especially since, like I said, the stop motion style would have made this so hard for him to do. It must have taken a week alone just to get his eyebrows to look like that. Believe me, I can relate. Granted, you could make the argument that the video seems a little bit hollow because the lyrics don't give much in the way of a narrative or meaning, and the imagery used is just so random. But really, who cares about that? This video is just so much fun to watch either way, and I feel that it really fits with the exotic and almost mysterious and alien sounds of the music, especially that tune that I'm not even sure what that instrument is, but it sounds awesome. If there is one thing to fault this video on, it's that near the end of the video, they kind of cheat with the stop motion effect and they just forcibly lower the frame rate, which is a cheap move, but after everything they've done through the video, I don't blame them for taking it easy and cutting some corners. This video really is one of the best things that Aardman has ever done, and really deserves to be on their pedigree shelf as one of their proudest achievements. As do all of these ads really. Aardman's kept itself going by branching out as much as it can, and for a relatively small studio, that's really quite impressive. And I hope that they continue to make more great stuff as time goes on, because I really don't know what we would do without them. And with that, that brings us to the end of this year's Aardmay. So, I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.
And now we move on to ads, and we're going to a company that Aardman has definitely had an affinity with in the past, Cadbury's, and this time we're talking about their cream eggs. Cream eggs' most popular ad campaign has always been the rabbit who lays them, which is bizarre, but Cadbury have done much stranger ads in the past and future, and I'd actually argue this is one of them, where they do various ways in which people eat the cream eggs in relation to the star signs. Not sure what they were thinking of when they came up with that idea, but it does lead to some interesting vignettes, and I might as well just riff on each one.
Hi, I'm Leo. I eat the lion's share.
I've heard of werewolves, but were-lions? And they apparently like to eat chocolate, although to be fair, that probably would kill a werewolf actually.
Aries, I give it a good battering.
Apparently, Aries also likes to dress like Del Boy, so shouldn't he actually have a Pernod and blackcurrant instead?
Libra, I like to weigh up the alternatives. Wait, hey!
I wasn't aware that the cat from Red Dwarf liked cream eggs. Is this ad just going to be having a bunch of cameos from characters from classic sitcoms and how they like to eat cream eggs?
Cancer, and I'm a shell man myself.
Okay, well that shoots that theory down, and I'll probably best skip this one before I make some horrifically offensive joke that I can't hide behind Huck in making.
Aquarius, and sometimes I get carried away.
But that won't stop me doing that for this one. I think you got the wrong studio, love. The food fetish set is next door. That's where they're filming Chocolate Bukkake 5.
Virgo, and this is my first one.
Same for you there, my dear. I think we really need to put the signposts up more clearly. Also, they totally stole that joke from Sabrina Online.
Capricorn, mind if I butt in?
That guy kind of looks like me, which is fitting I guess since I am actually a Capricorn, though I don't wear creepy sweaters like that. I get enough trouble with people telling me I look creepy, I don't need to add to that panache.
Scorpio, one nip from me and it's history.
Wow, even Shantae hasn't got hair whipping powers like that. Oh wait, hair whipping? Oh no, I'm getting Willow Smith flashbacks! Hopefully Will Smith doesn't punch me in the face for that remark.
Pisces, and I dive right in.
I genuinely don't know what to say about that one. Who knew fish could survive inside cream and caramel?
Gemini, and I like to slurp it. Bite it, slurp it, bite it.
Okay, this is getting a bit too sexual, even for me. Oh wait, was that the intention? To make it all just a bunch of double entendres?
Sagittarius, I could eat 2 or 3 on a trot.
Oh yeah, this is some sort of fetish video for somebody out there. Not sure who exactly, since I don't think there's ever a way you could make stop motion characters sexy.
Taurus, and I go at it like a bull in a sweet shop.
So you destroy it and leave it in tatters then? I suppose that makes sense. It's what I do to cream eggs. I can't stand them myself. In all seriousness, this is a very funny ad, though it is weird that they detach jokes like this to cream eggs of all things. Maybe they were working on this as a short film and then they got the commission for the cream egg ad and decided to adapt it for that. Either way, much like the crunchy ads, it doesn't make me want to buy one, but it certainly is fun to watch.
How do you do it?
And now we move on to a sweet that I actually do love and is one of Aardman's most popular ads, the Wine Gums Hutsmon ad, which is also known as the ad that spawned one of the most popular catchphrases of the 90s.
Hutsmon, there's juice, loose, about this house.
Well, it was in England anyway. The equivalent of the US would have probably been this.
Nobody better lay a finger on my butterfinger.
And that also had a famous animation studio attached to it, just like this one. This ad shows off something that Aardman doesn't do all that often, having stop motion alongside a human. They did it in the Sledgehammer music video, though I can understand why they didn't do it again that much afterwards, since unlike puppets and other objects, humans involuntarily move a tiny bit even when standing still, so it makes stop motion an even bigger nightmare than it already is. Funnily enough, that moose you see sort of became the mascot for Wine Gums for a bit in the future, so I guess he got tired of flying Dorothy around Oz and decided to get a proper job. Admittedly, the animation in this ad is done very smoothly, and you can't tell of any kind of mistakes that are made or any kind of cheap shortcuts. Well, except for the final shot where the guy dancing is clearly a separate shot over superimposed moving objects, but to be fair, with the amount of moving objects on screen, having to take shots of him alongside them would have been an Everest climbing level ordeal, so I can understand understand them cheating a little bit there. Still, for a simple concept for an ad, it's a lot of fun, which helps that the music is very catchy, and having stop motion creations keep in time with music is incredibly hard. I mean, having animated characters match time with music in general is very hard, but stop motion especially, and here it lines up perfectly. It's funny just how much effort Aardman puts into their ads. It's actually quite endearing, to be honest, but hey, when these jobs are paying your bills, you might as well make them look good. Maybe I should try that sort of work ethic for my jobs.
Set the juice loose!
And so, we move on to something that Aardman, but above all else, stop motion in general exceeds in, being unintentionally creepy. And being an expert on both of those things, I can say that this one is one of the best examples of both of them. This is an ad that was made to promote the London Film Festival in 1994. Oh, the same year I was born in, there's irony for you. The idea is having an audience of people in the cinema watching films, and the experience of watching them pulls them into a world that is like the film that they're watching. Not the most original idea for a movie ad, but it's always a blast to watch. But I must ask, Aardman, why did you make the audience look like this? Are you trying to say that moviegoers are creepy, ugly monsters? Well, that is definitely true if you go to a midnight screening, but still, these guys just look horrifying, and it really doesn't help the dark set and the creepy music and the sound design. It's just those huge, toothy, ugly grins they have. They freak me out, and this shot doesn't help matters either. Yeah, keep away from me, you weirdos. I don't know if this helped attract people to the festival, but if I saw this ad now, I'd avoid it like the plague. Though to be fair, when you make your own movies, going to a film festival is like its own form of torture, since you spend the whole time comparing the movies you're watching to the kind that you make, and by the end of it, you're more bitter than a rotten cherry mixed with kale. So having this kind of ad for a film festival is sort of fitting for me, since this kind of sums up how I feel when I attend one. But now, let's move on to something that is a little less creepy, but nonetheless just as evil. Insurance companies. In particular, the company known as the National Accident Helpline, and as expected, they advertised the idea of helping out the little guy with their policies. Well, whether that's true or not, that's none of my business, but we're here to talk about the ad, which includes... Oh, hi Rex, haven't seen you in a while. Okay, so that's not Rex the Runt, but it's just a separate character who shares a similar design, who this time is voiced by Joe Pasquale.
I went to National Accident Helpline. They're the biggest and the most experienced.
I guess he got lost on his way to Blackpool and then got turned into a dog, but what sort of person could be the complete opposite of his voice to star alongside him in these ads? Well, none other than Brian Blessed, of course.
And I think I should get some compensation.
Don't make me laugh, underdog.
Because the other side pays all the costs.
The other side pays all the costs?
You're not laughing there, are you?
Well, this is a role that certainly fits in better than one of the other Aardman ads he's in. As you'd expect, it's about this little underdog going up to the giant, faceless, nameless insurance guy to get compensation for an accident he's been in, but him refusing, so he decides to go to the NAH. They're rather simple ads, and to be honest, hearing these two polar opposite voices arguing with each other is actually really funny. I always imagine that if Joe and Brian ever screamed at the top of their lungs at the same time, it would shatter the very fabric of existence, but thankfully they don't do that here. The ads did get a bit more elaborate as they went on, even incorporating popular songs and having full-on sets, but they used the guys less, which is a shame, but it is still kind of cool to see Aardman return to these designs again after such a long time. Even if seeing them in the ad is kind of odd, it's still cool to see, since ironically Rex himself was also a bit of an underdog in the Aardman catalogue. Shame we didn't really get to see any more doggy dialogues with these ads though.
Underdog.co.uk.
And so we come to the last part of the video, and since I ended off the last Aardmay with a review of a music video, I feel that it was appropriate to end off this one the same way, and thankfully Aardman has had their hand in making other music videos as well. Last time I talked about one of the biggest and most influential new wave songs of the 80s, with one of the most creative, colourful and imaginative music videos of all time. This time we're looking at more or less the exact opposite, with a throwback 70s nostalgia song from 1996 with a very down-to-earth and most mostly true to reality music video. Of course, there's still some cartoon elements in there, and has sadly mostly gone forgotten by the general public, but me personally, I think I might actually like this just as much as Sledgehammer. Yes, this time we're talking about Never in Your Wildest Dreams by Tina Turner and Barry White. I will be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of either Turner or White, but they are both very, very good singers and have done some amazing music in the past. And with there being a massive 1970s revival movement in the 90s, and with both them being some of the biggest soul stars of their generation, seems only fitting that they bring us another 70s revival song for the decade. The song is definitely in the vein of seduction and sexual songs in the style of something that Marvin Gaye would do. And it is a very good song in that regard, with lots of lo-fi synthesizer sounds, and of course the amazing bassy voice of Barry White. I hear people walking, people talking. But of course, we're not here to talk about the song itself, we're here to talk about the music video. Said music video this time was made by Peter Lord himself, which you can kind of tell because the design of the humans in the video have that slightly more uncanny valley style to them, as opposed to Nick Park's very exaggerated cartoony style. Though in this case that worked out because they're supposed to resemble who the singers actually are, and one drawback with Nick Park's style is that you really can't capture the way people actually look with his style. Admittedly, Lord's style can be a little creepy sometimes, like during the first close-up of Tina Turner's face definitely took me aback a little bit. I was unaware that Tina Turner was a Bratz doll, but you do get used to it, and he is very good with depicting body shapes and having them look both cartoony, but in a weird way somewhat realistic, though that did get him into a bit of trouble with this video, but we'll get into that later. The basic premise of the video is basically Turner and White coming to meet each other in their respective limousines, both of which are insanely huge on the inside, so I guess Aardman are stealing Time Lord technology again, and are just going through their regular routine, or preparing themselves to get ready to meet the other one. One of which being that apparently Tina Turner likes to knit. And I mean, seriously likes to knit. She basically does nothing else throughout the entire video, which I will admit is actually kind of funny, that the idea that Tina Turner loves knitting, and apparently the inside of her limousine has enough space to accommodate an entire walk-in wardrobe and a swarm of paparazzi, which you would think that the chauffeur wouldn't have allowed them in the first place, but whatever. There's even a bar in there with a stage including some very familiar cameos, and one not so familiar cameo. If you can't tell, that's supposed to be Antonio Banderas, who is there because he also did a version of this song with Tina Turner. I do wonder which one he prefers, this animated rendition of him or the version of him that shows him as a cat who wears nothing but a hat and boots. Barry White on the other hand has a much more laid back approach to when he's approaching, which makes sense because that's more of the kind of person he is, such as getting a massage from what looks like a cartoon version of Mickey Rooney's character from Breakfast at Tiffany's. Not sure whose idea that was, but evidently it's not something you'd be able to get away with these days. Having a bath and ironing his shirts. When I say this, it kind of makes me think we're actually watching an old Marlon Brando here. Speaking of which, there is a little bit of controversy with this video, and no, it's not because of Barry White's masseuse in the video. See, when the video was finished and made, apparently Tina Turner loved it, but Barry White hated it, and the big reason for that is because they felt they were making fun of his weight in the video. I can certainly understand his mentality there, especially since the model in which they gave to his caricature is not a very flattering kind of size and shape, and it's probably made worse by the fact that how Tina Turner's caricature, despite having a very odd looking face, does look unbelievably sexy. So I guess I was wrong, it is possible to do that. And this probably isn't helped by the fact that at the time this video was made, both of them would have been in their 50s at the time. However, despite one moment near the end of the video with Tina Turner giving him the jumper that she's been making throughout the video being way too small for him, which I saw more as that she just wasn't very good at getting the measurements down, less about them making fun of his actual size, and the very unflattering size and shape of his model, I personally think they were actually quite respectful to White. They don't do any cheap jokes with his weight, like having him step into his limousine and having the rear fender scraping against the road or anything, or when he gets into his bath having all the water flow out like it's a tsunami. They actually treated him with quite a great deal of respect. Now of course I myself am not Barry White, more's the pity because I would love his voice. So if he felt he was misrepresented in the video, that is kind of a shame, though if the ghost of Barry White just happens to be listening, I do just want to say this: you looked better fat if I'm honest. You looked more cuddly and welcoming. When you were skinny, you looked rather creepy. I get the feeling that when I die, Barry White is not exactly going to be giving me the best reception when I arrive in heaven. Regardless of that, this actually is a really cool cool and funny music video. Not to mention the depiction of a much more American-style cityscape and the style of music reminded me a lot of the movie Chuck Steele, especially with this presumably being set in LA, though the group of hookers is a little bit head-tilting. Granted, it could be argued that this video was not intended to be seen by children, but still, I think it's a little bit iffy. It does have a much more straightforward and simple premise compared to other Aardman music videos, as well as the visuals for that matter, but they do fit with this kind of music, and despite that, it is still very creative and has a lot of imagination to it, even with its simple premise. And that just goes to show how much Aardman can show its creativity, even in something that has such a simple premise, which in many ways kind of sums up the way Aardman are in general. Very simple ideas, but made in a very creative way, and we've seen that countless times over the last few years since I've been doing these Aardmay videos, from movies, TV shows, TV commercials, and music videos. They've been able to bring us some of the most imaginative, charming, and simply just enjoyable stop motion projects that I have ever seen and have ever been made, period. And that brings us not only to the end of this year's Aardmay, but Aardmay in general, since there really isn't much left for me to talk about in terms of this company. If there is enough stuff that may be brought out in the future, I may return to this another time, but for now, we have come to the end of Aardmay. One hell of a journey it's been, I can tell you that. But onwards and upwards to the next review, and I'll see you then. Goodbye. Yep, we got another smorgasbord of ads to look at again this year, and I really love doing these. Not only because they're always so good, but Aardman really put their all into these ads when they don't really need to, but they still treat them as if they're as important as Wallace and Gromit or any of their other big franchises, and I really appreciate them for that. So, let's take a look at some of them now. Oh, and as for those This Is My BBC idents, I feel that they're not really worth mentioning. They're good, but it's just creature comforts again. There's not enough new about it to give me material to work with. Unlike... So let's start with a series of ads that Aardman did especially for America, and hopefully this time no lunatic future presidents pop up in this one, with the Chevron car ads, which is ironic since Chevron originated in the UK. These ads are basically done in the style of Creature Comforts, but this time they're scripted, with the cars speaking about situations they've been in and slipping in the reasons why they're good cars to use.
But I think she tries to make up for it. She gives me Chevron Supreme with Tecron because I'm a car designed for high-octane gas.
It's actually quite clever and feels very well flowing and natural for an ad, but of course, the big thing that stands out is the animation on the cars. Anthropomorphizing cars is a notoriously tricky thing to do, and has been done to varying degrees of success or failure before, but here, it's pretty good. The scale and shape of the car makes them look more cartoony, so the surreal quality of it being a talking car is easier to swallow. The use of the windscreen wipers as eyebrows is a really clever touch, and the bodywork squashes and stretches a little bit to help give them more life. It works really well, and I'm surprised that Aardman haven't tried doing more stuff like this. I could really see this working well as its own TV series. Hell, they still managed to put in some good gags. I love the white car who moves out from under where the birds are sitting. And speaking as someone whose car gets pooed on by seagulls every time I clean it, I just wish my car could do that. In fact, the ads were so popular they even spawned toys, which is really impressive considering Aardman have had ad campaigns that have been even more popular than this that didn't get toys, so bravo to them. But let's take a look at an ad that they did that does have toys linked to it, but not from how popular the ads themselves were. Yep, we can't have an Aardmay without at least one thing involving Wallace and Gromit, and they've done a ton of ads over the years. We've looked at their DFS ad before, but now to a whole series of ads they've done for N-Power. There's not too much to talk about here in terms of how it functions as ads. I mean, it's N-Power, it's a gas and electric company, they haven't got much going for them in terms of identity. But the ads themselves are basically super quick shorts of the two in a similar vein to the cracking Contraptions short, such as Wallace inventing a pie cannon for a football game, which thank God he didn't have a mash and curry slingshot to go with it, that would have been a horribly messy disaster. Making a makeshift widescreen TV with a lot of smaller TVs, though this does remind me a lot of the movie Sliver, which is really something I don't want to think about in the context of Wallace doing. And of course something else we didn't need to imagine or see, Naked Wallace. Joking aside, I love these ads because it's basically just the pair living their lives and being the same lovable characters they've always been. We could watch these guys do just about anything and it'd be fun. Well, almost anything. Plus, it's cool to see Aardman still be creative with these ads, even though, again, they didn't really need to be, but it's good to see them putting just as much effort into these as they would anything else. And to make sure that anything that has Wallace and Gromit in it is good, and that's awesome, so thanks for that, boys. But let's move on to an ad that I'm surprised Aardman didn't use Wallace and Gromit for. Yep, it's the franchise of Aardmans that people often forget about, and I get the feeling that some people at Aardman themselves wish they could forget about. Pib and Pog, weirdly advertising something that's made for kids. I would say that's like getting Rick and Morty to advertise kid-friendly junk food, but, well, they've kind of done that as well. These were made between the initial first short and the TV series, so the ads are more in tune with the itchy and scratchy style humour of the first short, rather than the monkey dust style humour of the TV series, which was probably the best way to go. As adult as the first short intended to be, compared to what we have now, it's pretty tame and kids can still watch it. And these ads are pretty funny, as short as they can be, and really do capture the feel of the first short, but the pacing is much faster, which works perfectly for me, since I did find the first one to be a bit too long-winded. But it's still the same passive-aggressive cartoon violence that we love from these two, and the animation, timing, and voice acting, which is still provided by Joanna Wake and Andrew Wilson, which is great that they came back for this ad, is still as good as always.
What have you got, Pog? Ooh, creamy Dairy Dunkers.
We get them stuffing their faces into cream, feeding each other dynamite, or knocking a bell over their heads. That sounds slightly dirty, but maybe that's just me. I do just wish they would have had them bring out their Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud voices again. I admit, I have no idea what made them want to use Pib and Pog to advertise these products. I mean, like I said, it would have made more sense for Wallace and Gromit to do it. Hell, Aardman have even done ads for other Dairy Lee products and they still didn't have Wallace and Gromit in them. But who cares? It's always fun seeing Pib and Pog, whether they're beating each other up with shells, dunking their heads in cream, or eating heroin, they're always funny, even if they do look like walking potatoes. Speaking of which, so let's take a look at a slightly more recent Aardman ad, their Walker's Crisp ads. So this is a rare time when they actually used a real piece of food in stop motion, which is a really tricky thing to do because, of course, unlike plasticine, food is constantly changing slightly when it's out in the open, so you've not only got to be methodical with working with it, but you've got to be fast. But clearly it worked out here with Mr. Potato Head, though this one is not voiced by Don Rickles, as much as I'd love to see that. Ironically, Rickles sounds like the name of a brand of crisps. Surprised Disney never seized that opportunity to make their own brand of crisp called Rickles with Mr. Potato Head's face on it. What the hell am I talking about? No, in fact, Walker's long-standing spokesperson and football commentator Gary Lineker provides the voice of the Spud.
Then they remove 70% of the saturated fat compared to standard Walker's crisps. Handsome devil.
And they even go so far as to make it look like him, which is not only hilarious, but also slightly eerie in how much it really does look like him. And I thought I looked like Mr. Potato Head. Beyond that, it's just your typical spokesperson talking in a white void explaining why the product is good ad, but the quirky animation and visuals do make it memorable, so much so that they actually put the image of the Lineker Spud on the packet for a few years, which I actually do remember. They also did a second ad for the Walker's Cheesehead Crisps, which also sounds really dirty, with a character of the same name. I couldn't find who voiced the guy, not sure if it's another sort of celebrity, but it's still a fun ad.
He's a bit...
That's me! Cheesehead by name and cheesehead by nature.
In fact, Aardman have had a long history of using Mr. Potato Head in ads. In the 90s, they also used him for advertising Burger King fries, which you can use any big names you want. It's not going to make those grease strips any less gross tasting. And this time, he looked and sounded more like what you would imagine.
Hey, what about potatoes?
Still no Don Rickles, but Miss Potato Head has had a lot of different voices over the years, all of which do sound vaguely Jewish. Aside from Lineker, either way, these ads were more elaborate and had higher production values, which makes sense when you've not only got Burger King money behind you, Walker's probably lost a lot of their profit trying to figure out why they changed their name from Lay's in the UK, but usually it focused on Mr. Potato Head promoting some sort of new meal at Burger King, and some of them were pretty funny. I especially like the one where he has a lawyer next to him when he's making a statement.
On behalf of Burger King, it's a privilege to introduce the fries that'll change history.
Still less stupid than some of the things that Trump's lawyers have had to stop him from saying, and at least this guy goes bald with dignity. But in both ads, I do have to wonder why Mr. Potato Head is promoting the eating of his brethren in a deep-fried form. Then again, with those massive eyes and fixed grin, he has always looked a little creepy. Maybe he's a closet sadist and does the deed himself. Though he's still less creepy than Burger King's future mascot. But yeah, it makes about as much sense as Foghorn Leghorn promoting Kentucky Fried Chicken.
If you want great chicken, go to Kentucky Fried Chicken.
It's the only place to get America's favorite chicken.
Wait, that actually happened? And so, as we normally do, we close off with a music video, and when it came to choices this year, it was obvious. I had to go with the Spice Girls music video, if simply because it finally gives me an excuse to make jokes about this band. I can probably guess that people younger than me probably have no idea who the Spice Girls are, and that's not much of a surprise considering they were very much a flash in the pan sort of band. But to sum up, they were a British pop girl band who were formed by the guy who would go on to create American Idol, yes, seriously, and for pretty much just 1 year they were the biggest band in the world in the late 90s, but they fizzled out pretty quickly, and after the disaster of their movie spin-off Spice World, they all went their separate ways, leaving Simon Fuller, the guy who put them together, to make a new band that literally had his name stamped on it, which spawned the teen musical sitcom genre. And as mentioned before, then made another show which spawned the modern reality TV show generation.
You bastard.
Regardless of that, the Spice Girls did make some good songs, like Two Become One and Spice Up Your Life, but we're not here to talk about their music. We're here to talk about a music video. The overall narrative of the music video is rather loose, mostly about two boys finding a bunch of giant gacha capsules, and coming across fairies that look like the Spice Girls and other giant toys. In fact, the song itself is pretty inconsequential to the video. After a while, I'm more interested in what I'm seeing rather than what I'm hearing. I just want to watch this and check out some of these funky looking fairies, which, as you'd imagine, was the main contribution Aardman provided with the stop motion puppets. And I must say, I do believe that these models set a very not true to life body image. Posh Spice was way skinnier than that. Welcome to Jokes from 2003. Also, I think Scary Spice was misnamed because, Jesus, the eyes on Ginger Spice's puppet, those will stare into your soul. How dare you take one of our most beloved red-headed cuties and turn them into this? That is a war crime in 50 countries, sir. I have to say the designs of the models is very unique for Aardman. It reminds me a lot of something you'd see in a Leica movie, but the thing it reminds me of mostly, and I know this is the most random thing to come to mind, is the littlest elf from the series of Unfortunate Events movie. Granted, that was CGI, but it was made to emulate stop motion style, and the rictus grins on the models here and the mix of charming with creepy, it really does remind me of that little bit from the movie. Though sadly Jude Law doesn't come in to take us to a story of tragedy, darkness, and needlessly overcomplicated plots. Yeah, I said it, your writing sucks, Lemony Snicket, whose name sounds like the rejected idea for a lemon-flavoured Snickers bar. What were we talking about again? Oh right, the Spice Girls. The integration with live action is also really good. Unlike Peter Gabriel's music video, which had Peter painstakingly shot within the stop motion process, here it's more like a Roger Rabbit situation where the kids in question are acting like the Spice Fairies are there and then they're animated in afterwards. But it's done really seamlessly, and I have to give the kids credit because they sell it really well. Well, apart from this part where the kid looks surprisingly bored before reacting to the Rubik's Cube opening up. You've just seen something that should blow your little mind, son. Tell your face. Also, I do love this bit where the kid goes into the Rubik's Cube and his friend has to solve it to get him back out. Not only is that hilarious, because if that was me, by the time I figured it out, the guy inside would look like Julian Assange when he got dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, but it just reminds me so much of that Rubik the Amazing Cube sketch from Robot Chicken.
There you are! I'll bring you back, Rubik! Friendless nerd kids solve you blindfolded all the time!
Though I suppose it doesn't matter because he never does come out of the cube and the other kid just leaves him in the giant gotcha machine, and then he becomes a fairy, which leaves us on this terrifying image. Thanks for that. Regardless, I like the tone and atmosphere of this video. It really does capture that childhood sense of wonder and imagination. It kind of reminds me of Winnie the Pooh in that regard, just with sexy fairies that look like pop stars instead. Which, that's a word I never thought I'd hear in the same sentence as Winnie the Pooh. Sexy. Then again, blood is another one I never thought I'd hear in relation to it either, and look what happened here. Wait, how did the sequel get that high a rating? Either way, it's not as good as the two previous Aardman music videos we'd looked at, but this is a fun video, and it does have great animation and visuals to it, and, as always, has that great Aardman charm and imagination to it, which is why I'll always keep coming back to this company and the amazing stuff they produce. We'll probably do something else again next year to give Aardman a chance to recharge and give me more stuff to talk about, but until then, we'll see you for the next video. Bye! And so we're back to ads and music videos one last time. This will probably be the last one for a while since I've not really got any more left to talk about, and this will also be a shorter one because of that. But I always do love talking about these, so let's get into them for our last video of Aardmay 2025. First off, an ad that I was surprised to find out that Aardman had anything to do with, Thatcher's Cider. Or, as they call it down in the home of cider, the West Country, cider.
Sleeping cider.
While I'm teetotal now, I did drink some Thatchers back when I still drank, and I remember it tasting quite nice, but this isn't about the amber nectar, this is about the ad. As you can see, the style of these ads is unlike anything that Aardman has done before. You may have seen it used by other animation teams in recent movies like Beetlejuice 2, and it's quite outstanding. It reminds me a lot of the animation Wes Anderson uses in his animated movies, but using puppets that are now incredibly more realistic looking. It's honestly quite unnerving how realistic and at the same time not realistic these things look, but they do look amazing. I will say though that while they've got the people down perfect, they still have work to do on the other creatures. That dog kind of looks like a Sylvanian Family's doll that's had a really rough life. But still, the technology alone in how we see it here shows that stop motion can still keep up with the big boys in animation and keep surprising us. In terms of the narrative of the ads, there's nothing too special. It's just a well-flowing series of vignettes to show how they make their cider, with a mix of CGI in there. But the colours are beautiful. It really makes you feel like you're at a cider farm. The main character is the company head and spokesperson, Martin Thatcher. Although I have to say that his puppet looks nothing like the real person. He looks more like a cross between Hugh Bonneville and Martin Clunes than Thatcher. But hey, you get what you get. Most of the ads involve him doing a taste test, and thank God Thatchers don't make fighting cider, or else these ads would turn into a Wes Anderson movie by the end. Either way, it's really cool to see Aardman working with new techniques, but let's get back to something that's more traditional from them. The problem with having done this for so long is that it becomes hard to find new ads that aren't like ones I've already talked about, like this country code ad. It's just creature comforts again, but every once in a while they surprise you with something very different and actually quite shocking. This is a short film they did for Greenpeace to promote environmental awareness, specifically how sea turtles are suffering from endangerment. It starts off all sweet and innocent, just seeming like a family of turtles on their way back from holiday in a car ride.
It's a video, Mum.
Oops, sorry. How much longer?
Don't worry, we'll be home in no time.
But then this happens.
Let's get you inside.
Dad? What's that noise?
Guys, it's okay. It's okay.
And then it finishes off with this.
What's my face?
Well, now I can't watch Wallace and Gromit without getting PTSD. Thanks for that. Of course, we in the UK have scary and traumatizing PSA videos down to an art form, and yes, as this ad shows, we're still doing them. But to see Nick Park's animation style used to make this one, it legit gave me a feeling of anxiety and fear I'd not felt for a long time when watching one of these. Seeing his charming, cute cartoon characters be put through something like this, and then see them looking so crushed emotionally, it really did get to me. And honestly, I think it was actually quite a smart idea. It's that little level of messed up, but the right amount to get people to realise what's going on in a world we can't see, and to take something that we associate as being comforting and making it seem harrowing and horrific. It really does grab you and makes you remember it, so bravo there. In terms of it being made for its cause, there's always the argument of them being a bit gratuitous, or how it doesn't really provide an answer to this problem beyond signing a petition and supporting a charity that is claiming to know what to do. But this isn't a review of Greenpeace, this is about the ad, and I think it's really well made and a really clever idea. I really have to give them credit for that. It also uses some other techniques that we'd not really seen from Aardman before, like POV camera shots and more found footage feel to it, which is really interesting. I admit it's not something I might choose to watch in the future, but it is certainly very well made and I certainly won't forget it. But let's get into something more light-hearted, shall we? Well, when I said light-hearted, I didn't mean too light-hearted, because now we're visiting an old nemesis of mine, Angry Kid. Okay, I'll be honest, perhaps my thoughts on Angry Kid in the past were a bit too harsh. There is creativity, craft, and some good humour in those shorts. But my thoughts haven't changed. I find it annoying, unpleasant, and just not fun to watch. But a contrast to that is this ad, which was made in the same style of that show. This is an ad they made for Pringles, the sort of crisp snack that, despite having the most British looking mascot since Uncle Moneybags from Monopoly, it's actually made in America. Not too surprising, since whatever potatoes they use to make these from is not the dreary, depressed, black marked potatoes we have in this country. Regardless, this actually is quite a funny ad about a brother and a sister playing around with different Pringles in their mouths. This is vastly superior to Angry Kid already in how the characters don't talk. That's a big win right there. But more so, it's how it's brilliantly timed and has a lot of Looney Tunes-esque energy. I legit laughed at a lot of these setups and they're really creative, so I do have to give them credit there. See, Angry Kid? Why couldn't you be more like this? Although, that being said, never actually do this with Pringles. They can be sharp and get caught in the throat easily. That would be the one time when you do stop after you pop. So I think it's time to call it on the ads. Not that there aren't still more out there to talk about, but I think I've hit just about every flavour of ad Aardman has ever done. There's really not anything left that I can talk about without repeating myself. So, time to move on to the music videos. But here, we've got a bit of a problem. There's really only one left. Now, to be sure, Aardman has worked on other music videos providing animated segments to them, like Love Can Heal by their old pal Peter Gabriel, though it's nowhere near as fun and colourful as the last music video they did for him. I guess leaving Genesis really messed him up. Feel like I'm listening to a Lost Bjork song. Daddy by the most divisive band of the late 2000s, Coldplay, which is a sweet video, but there's not that much variety to give me so much to talk about. Hell, I wish I had more to talk about with it, because I could probably have made jokes about Coldplay being overhyped or overhated or just unlucky to get the reputation they had all day. And My Baby Cares For Me by Nina Simone, which feels more like a student animation project than anything else, but it is interesting to see some pre-Wallace and Gromit stuff from Aardman, especially since the sets have an almost German expressionist vibe to them, which is really cool. But the only one left that really gives me stuff to talk about is Barefootin' by Robert Parker, another old song that they basically did a fan music video to, but is way more surreal and creative. And for the record, this title is not a reference to a character having a foot fetish. If it was, it'd probably be Tarantino's, and my favourite song. Yes, I'm a perv, but at this point, who doesn't know that? Barefootin' is a classic 60s R&B dance song, kinda like The Twist or The Duck, though it didn't quite catch on as much of a dance craze as those ones did, but it is a nice catchy song.
Take off your shoes and pat your feet. We're doing a dance that can't be beat.
But apparently Aardman's interpretation of this song is that it's sung by a bunch of aliens popping out of craters. I keep expecting to see the Soup Dragon or the Smash Mash robot pop up at any second here. Regardless of that little weird bit, the video is incredibly creative and has a ton of stuff happening all at once. And while the animation is a bit crude, since this is again pre-Nick Park animation, the fact that there's so much moving on screen all at once is really impressive. It reminds me a lot of The Trapdoor, though this isn't quite as technically grand as that show was. It is definitely applaudable in just how much detail and effort went into this video, even if it hasn't aged well in its technology. And that includes all the screen skips and juttering. Sorry about that, but it's the only video I could find of this. Also, that alien with the red dress on, does anyone think that she looks like the guy from the Big Nose from the Pink Panther cartoons painted green in drag? No? Am I the only one that sees it? Alright, fair enough. Also, on reflection, maybe I was wrong. This does feel like a stealth foot fetish video. Either that or I'm more pervy than I thought. Either one is very likely. Also, I have to say, I love the part where the main alien pulls his nose and strums it to the tune of the bass. It's one of those things that you only see in stop motion. It's very much like something you would see in Morph. On that note, you can see how this was really made by Peter Lord. It does have a lot of that Morph-like style and techniques to it, and I've always loved the Morph style, both in animation and in comedy, so to see it in something unrelated like this is quite fun. Regardless, Aardman's style has changed a lot over the years, but their sense of fun and creativity has never died, as both this video shows and the other things we've looked at Aardmay this year. I hope you've enjoyed this year's videos, and as I said, I'll probably be having to take a break from this for a bit as Aardman has to catch up with me and make some more stuff for me to talk about. This is one of the downsides about doing a series about a stop motion animation company, and that I can make these videos a lot faster than they can give me things to talk about. Either way, I don't see Aardman ending anytime soon, and once they've made more stuff to talk talk about, I'll be there to bring it all back to you. But until then, see you next time. Bye.